One day the world came to an end. Many factors influenced this from different sides, and humanity found itself in great danger. A pandemic began around the world. The news feed was filled with facts about the infected, the number of which reached 1 million people aged between 20 and 30. The world was also shaken by the bloody war. Countries suffered huge losses of human resources. A real economic collapse set in. There was not enough food for everyone, which caused the residents to revolt. Such ominous omens appeared. But those who hammered the final nail into the coffin of humanity were not the people themselves. The end of humanity was approaching, and there were game characters, monsters. What happened soon was quite predictable. Many understood what they would have to face sooner or later. As in the novels, superhumans appeared who had abilities. However, what distinguished reality from fiction was that the superhumans were not strong enough to end the apocalypse. When the cities were already in ruins, many decided to stay in their still surviving homes and not stick their heads out in vain just to survive. This young man was one of them, but he was still doing much better than the rest of his town. And while people were fighting for a piece of bread, he enjoyed chips. For him, things weren't that bad, and he made the most of his opportunities in time to prolong such a life. He believed that the world had not yet come to an end, since he still had the opportunity to live his normal life. Despite this, heavy sighs continued to escape from his chest. He didn't have to fight for his survival, but he found himself completely alone, locked in his apartment. He lived alone. His place was 100 square meters, which to others might seem like luxury at that time, but he was worried about something else. His mother and father, as well as his grandparents, were outside. His father decided to buy this place. 200 million won from the bank and all the family property, which amounted to another 200 million won, were spent. The reason the young man stayed in the apartment, even though he was not born rich, was that someone had to live there for 2 years before the family could claim a tax deduction for the purchase. So the young man lived in this house, but then he was locked in it by a sudden apocalypse. And then one day he picked up his phone and looked at the screen and swore loudly. Beads of sweat began to appear on his face due to excitement, and his face began to distort in fear. The telephone network and the internet were gone. He could no longer find out what was going on around him. He sighed heavily from the realization that he was now completely isolated from the rest of the world. But his thoughts were interrupted by some strange cry. The voice repeated itself, and the young man began to listen, trying to understand what exactly it was. The sound was coming from outside. The guy looked out the window and saw a huge bird flying straight at him and screaming disgustingly. But this was a completely unusual bird for ordinary people. It was a terrible flying monster, opening its mouth and sticking out its tentacles to meet its prey. The monster crashed into the window, which made the young man very scared and jumped back, covering himself with his hands. He was ready for the monster to bite him with its sharp teeth. But the glass did not break. The monster continued to beat against the glass and scream loudly. The young man was paralyzed with fear and expected that his end would come soon. He was shaking all over with horror and didn't even dare to open his eyes and look at the monster trying to get to him. The young man moaned quietly, trying to protect himself from the danger with his hands. Suddenly, a holographic screen appeared in front of the young man, giving a notification that a subject who was not allowed to enter was trying to enter, after which the notification changed, indicating that no one could enter the house without the owner's permission, and the absolute recluse function was turned on. Seeing this, the young man completely exhaled all the horror from himself, although he was still very scared. Having calmed down a little, he remembered that he shouldn't have cursed so much at this terrifying monster bird. He moved closer to the window and reminded himself that his life was only kept alive by this house-guarding thing. The young man approached the door and tried to open it by pulling hard on the corresponding lever, but the door did not give in. He began to beat against the door, cursing loudly and getting angry at the situation he found himself in. But the house was set up in such a way that not only could no one enter the house, but no one could even leave it in extreme conditions outside. The doors were made very well and were also armored, so there was no way to just knock them down and get out. Having finished another attempt to get out, the guy went back to the window with the thought that it was already the 3rd day since the world met its end. And thanks to this damn system that protected him from external horrors, he was still locked up in complete solitude and without the ability to help his loved ones. When the sun had already set, the guy tried to look for something in the system settings in the hope that he would be able to change them and exit. But the attempt was a failure. The system issued a notification that the absolute recluse could not leave the house, which simultaneously made the young man angry and amused. The laughter was rather nervous. The young man could do nothing, and the only thing he could do was continue to sit locked in his apartment and wait. But it wasn't a good outcome for him. He knew he wouldn't last long locked up, even though the house protected him from monsters and stuff. He had problems with food. The supplies could not last long, and they needed to be replenished somehow. The power went out in the refrigerator yesterday, so there were also problems with long-term storage of food products. All those days he managed to survive on the supplies that remained in the refrigerator, but without electricity, they would not have lasted long. He also looked around and discovered that he only had a few packs of instant noodles left, which would only last him a couple of days. The young man was again distracted by a notification from his smart home, which said that he had managed to kill the calican, and thanks to this he had gained a large amount of experience and his skill level had increased. The young man did not fully understand what this notice meant. He glanced towards the window and decided to go up and see what was going on outside. Approaching the window and looking down, he was very surprised. There was indeed a huge calican monster lying on the ground, the one that had tried to break his window not long ago. A crowd of other monsters had gathered around it, considering it their prey. The young man assumed that the experience points were counted specifically for him because the monster crashed into his house and died as a result. The house system began to calculate the possible reward, but the guy did not pay attention to it and was glued to his gaze downwards. Outside, various screams of monsters were heard, who were happy with their prey. The guy thought that they had definitely gone crazy, allowing him to attack one of their own. The crowd around the flying monster was growing. Apparently, they also had a hard time, since they decided to finish off their own and let go of any attempts to reach the guy on the higher floors. While the young man was watching the situation from the outside, the house system finished its deductions and a decent amount of money was credited to the guy's wallet. The young man didn't understand all this until the light turned on above him. The house was connected to electricity again, which the young man certainly did not expect. For a while, the guy just froze in place and looked at the bright light of the lamp hanging on the ceiling and tried to believe what was happening. The home system again issued a notification that all room functions had been restored. And finally, the young man realized what was happening and felt the strongest joy from such news. He immediately jumped up and ran to the refrigerator to make sure that the electricity was actually powering the entire house and not just the lights. When the guy opened the refrigerator, he discovered that the light inside had come on and the temperature inside had begun to drop. Afterwards, he went to check the water taps and was even happier because the water started flowing from the tap with good pressure. He checked all the electrical appliances, even the electric stove, which of course was also ready for use. The guy couldn't believe such a miracle, because it seemed that he wouldn't be able to enjoy the benefits of civilization anytime soon. He fell to his knees in happiness and began to thank the higher powers and rejoice that everything had returned to the way it was before the end of the world. There was only one thing left to do. He took his phone out of his pocket, hoping that the network had also appeared. But when I unlocked the screen, I discovered that there was still no internet or mobile coverage. This upset him greatly, because it was not known what was happening in the world, and when all the horror would end, and it would be possible to return to normal life. Having calmed down, the guy glanced around the room in search of something. There was a flash drive lying on the floor among papers and wrappers. He picked it up and connected it to the computer and began to view the media files stored on it. In one of the photographs, he was still a screaming baby in the arms of his loving and caring mother. In the next photo, he was much older, smiling and holding the hand of one of his parents. The next photo was of him as a teenager with his father and mother. Everyone was smiling, and no one could have imagined what would happen a few years later. The last thing he saw was a frame from his birthday party. Blowing out the candles, the carefree young man was once again surrounded by his family. This shot upset him very much. All the mood left and the joy of connecting all the benefits of the house quickly laughed. He sighed heavily. He didn't know what was happening to his family and if they were okay, and it was very difficult. At that moment, he decided that he had to bring his entire family to this house, no matter what it cost him. He was very determined and jumped up from his chair. Approaching the window again and looking around, he repeated to himself that he had to do everything possible to save his family. His gaze wandered, and he noticed the home screen where a new notification had appeared. The notice stated that the owner of the house had the opportunity to purchase goods in the store at the indicated prices. The presence of the store surprised him much more than the return of water and electricity, and he immediately headed towards the screen. The discovery of an online store at home made the young man think for a moment. He decided to open an online store to see what could be purchased there and whether it was possible to do so in principle in this situation. The system suggested making a list of goods and showed the amount in the wallet. It became clear that the wallet at home was connected with the light of the young man. The young man moved away from the screen and approached the balcony, trying to open the doors to the outside. But the system again notified about the ban on leaving the premises. The young man did not expect the house to be unlocked and he would be able to get out, as his skill level had increased a little, and it was worth at least trying. But the guy knew one thing for sure. He looked around his house for the umpteenth time and made a mental sketch of the defeated monsters. He understood that if he hunted monsters, his level would increase, and he himself would receive a new skill. He would have to hunt until he learned the skill that would allow him to get out, but it was not yet clear how to defeat the monsters. He doubted that the flying monster birds would decide to try their luck again and start knocking on the windows, which would kill them. His gaze fell down to where the goblins had finished the calican, and an idea came to his mind. He assumed that he would be able to kill the goblins, unlike the monsters that flew and were much larger and more agile. Having thought of this, the guy ran to the kitchen and took a plastic bottle of water. He walked up to the window, opened it, and swung it to make a throw. He first filled the bottle with water and threw it out the window. After waiting for it to fall, he was happy because his idea worked. The guy couldn't go outside the house, but he could throw objects out of it. This couldn't be bad news, and it was a big deal. The guy reached for the dumbbell. Taking it in his hands, a wide smile appeared on his face in anticipation of such a throw. But when he leaned out of the window again, he froze in surprise at what he saw. The goblins had a foreman who shouted something loudly in his own language to his subjects, who listened very attentively and shouted back. After a certain gathering, the entire crowd gathered the food they had obtained and began to move away. The guy cursed loudly because the goblins' departure ruined all his plans, and besides, it was unclear when they would return and whether they would return at all. He decided not to waste time and, opening the window again, swung the dumbbell, hoping that its fall would attract the attention of the monsters. He threw the dumbbell as hard as he could and prayed that it would hit the target. And fortunately for the young man, the throw was very successful, and the dumbbell hit the head of one of the monsters and thus attracted the attention of the others. The goblins squealed in surprise and then anger, just like pigs. Looking at his results, the young man thought that this would be the end for him. He had one more dumbbell left and essentially had nothing else to throw. He couldn't understand what to do and doubted that there was anything else at home that could kill the goblins, and the guy understood that he wasn't strong enough to throw the TV or the computer. The goblins' screams grew louder and could be clearly heard on the upper floor, reaching the guy. The goblins, after losing one of their own, got angry and decided to go back, and were now thinking about how to get to their offender. The foreman, who was given away by his distinctive hairstyle and bone necklace, growled and egged on the others to prepare for the mission of capturing the man. It was impossible to say that the young man was not frightened. He did not know how smart and cunning these creatures were and how strong his house was. After listening to their leader, the goblins growled, raising their heads up. And in a second, everyone rushed forward to attack the house in which their enemy was located. After standing and thinking for a while, the young man decided that everything wasn't so bad. At this distance, the goblins were vulnerable, and he just had to figure out how to defeat them. At that moment, an interesting thought came to him again, and he moved away from the windows. He walked towards the home control screen and opened the store. The screen again displayed a notification asking me to add the desired items to the list and showed the wallet balance. Without thinking for long, the young man pressed the touch button to go to the list of products. The system asked for confirmation of the choice, and the owner of the house decisively pressed the desired button. A new classic dumbbell with a non-slip coating weighing 3 kilograms appeared in his hand, after which it was added to the list of selected products in the store. The guy was surprised that the price in this store was exactly the same as on the internet, and assumed that the market price here remained the same as it was before the end of the world. The guy added 2 of these dumbbells to his shopping cart and confirmed his choice. He was very pleased that he was able to complete the purchase under such conditions. All that remains is to wait for the product to load and appear in front of him. After a short time, dumbbells appeared in front of him through some kind of teleport, which was a big surprise. The guy jumped up with joy. He was happy that everything worked. He was not modest and shouted enthusiastically that now everything made sense. He himself had a chance to change a lot. He immediately ran to the window and threw another dumbbell down. She also landed well and cracked the head of one of the goblins. The system notified that the goblin had died and credited the cash reward to the account and added experience, which made the guy even happier. The goblins crowded around their fallen friend and growled, warning that they would take revenge. And at that moment, another dumbbell flew from above. The stupid creatures didn't even have time to understand anything, but the goblins scattered and the dumbbell fell to the ground without hitting anyone. This upset the young man and made him curse in frustration. Without thinking twice, he bought 3 more sets of the same 3-kilogram dumbbells. As soon as the delivery to the apartment took place, the guy immediately grabbed one of the dumbbells and threw it out the window. This time the dumbbell hit where it was supposed to and reduced the number of monsters by 1. The monetary reward was credited to the account as well as experience points, which increased the skill level and added a new skill, which made the young man jump for joy on the spot. The new skill was an alternate dimension used to store items. The young man gave the command to open the vault. He then picked up one of the dumbbells. The system requested confirmation to visit this item in the vault. The dumbbell began to dissolve, and a notification appeared stating that the item had been placed in storage. There was a command below to summon an item from the storage, and the guy did it right away. That same dumbbell began to appear in his hand. The guy squeezed the object tighter and smiled broadly, glad that the storage function worked properly and was available, and now he could summon items from the storage to any place. At that moment, another wonderful idea was born in his head. He immediately began to carry it out, and blue light emanated from the window for a very long time. He was at the screen working with the functions of the house and at the same time opened the storage of items. He kept his hand at the ready and summoned a dumbbell from storage, after which he repeated the command and then again and again until the entire room was filled with this sports accessory. When the guy finished with the purchase and order in the storage, he immediately began the second part of his plan, and a deadly hail of dumbbells fell on the goblins from above. The monsters had nowhere to go, because objects were falling everywhere and it was difficult to hide from them. As a result, the young man managed to earn a little more than 50,000 won for his wallet and get a decent amount of experience points. The plan worked, and he decided to add more items to his virtual storage. He added 10 more items after opening the store. The list included the dumbbells he used to defeat goblins, as well as all sorts of food and everyday necessities. After finishing his shopping, he discovered something that confused him. A Voan disappeared from his account. He wondered if saving his life was worth the money and began to think further. He looked around his entire apartment, trying to figure out where the money had gone. Electricity, gas, and water bills were also checked, and the guy suggested that it was because of the refrigerator. It was all too much trouble. The guy was angry at everything, including the black goblins. After he hunted the goblins by throwing dumbbells at them, they fled and abandoned their former home. Since then, he managed to kill only a couple of goblins. He cursed them. I think there were no more creatures that he could terrorize. He looked at the remains of the bird monster, which had already been dismantled as prey. This gave further confirmation that he would have to find another way to improve his skills through hunting. He looked at it for a long time, thinking about his future plans. He wondered if luck would turn on him again, and a stupid calican would fly past the house. And what was the guy's surprise when he discovered a black dot approaching in the sky? And indeed, after a short moment, it was possible to discern at this point that very necessary calican. The monster squealed and, opening its ugly mouth with many tongues, flew toward the young man's house. The guy was both happy and a little nervous, because the calican was truly terrifying to look at. Throwing aside all his worries, the young man ran into the room for the necessary items, thanking God that he had not abandoned him. He quickly began to drag some things to the window and build something out of them. He used a drying board, tied a frying pan to it with towels, and put it out the window. He placed the frying pan under the rays of the sun so as to attract the monster to himself with its radiance. And indeed, the creature became interested in this glare and turned its head towards the young man. She screamed with hostility and began to fly towards the house, towards the window where the guy stood, no longer expecting her. At this time, the young man began to move back a little, pulling his bait construction behind him. Calican picked up speed and was already rushing, as if thinking after his prey, which, strangely enough, did not move from its place. The young man greeted the monster with a smile, once again happy that his latest idea had brought the desired results. Thinking that the prey would be caught without problems, the calican crashed straight into the protected window, failing to break through either it or the wall. The powerful blow stunned the calican for some time. The young man was immensely happy and thought that at this pace he would quickly achieve what he wanted. He was sure that he would definitely raise his level if he killed this creature. The monster quickly came to its senses and again began to try to break through the house's defenses and get to its dinner. It was quite a shake-up for the guy. The monster's blows were so strong that it was hard to stand still. The young man certainly didn't expect this, but rather thought that the monster would fall dead very quickly. Suddenly, the calican disappeared from view, although the house was still shaking. The young man carefully approached the window to understand what was happening. The young man's face froze in horror as he looked out the window to see where the monster had gone. The creature had clung to the house and was hanging right overhead, its hideous mouth gaping. The guy was very confused at this point. because now it seemed he was in danger, having lured this monster to his home. The monster became more persistent in trying to get through the defense. This calican was obviously much stronger than the previous one and did not give up, continuing to peck at the barrier with its beak. The home security system beeped, notifying over and over that an unauthorized entity was trying to enter. The young man began to doubt that the protective barrier would be able to withstand and not let the monster through. Trying not to waste time, he opened the store, thinking that he had to do at least something. From what he had observed so far, the date count only occurred if a corpse was nearby. His hunt was not successful for this very reason. Some of the surviving goblins took the corpses of their fallen brethren, and they were not counted as loot. In other words, if the distance exceeded a certain limit, then the date calculation did not occur, and the young man was left with nothing. He couldn't allow this to happen and began to wonder if there was a way to kill the calican with one blow. He ran his eyes over the list of items he had already purchased and singled out one among them. It seemed like a good idea to him, and he immediately began preparing to carry out his next plan. The guy added 10 bottles of canola oil to his cart, and I immediately clicked on the confirmation that appeared to agree. A few seconds later, bottles of oil were already standing in front of him. The young man grabbed them all with both hands and ran to the kitchen as fast as he could. He took the largest saucepan out of the drawer and placed it on the electric stove. Afterwards, he began to pour oil from the bottles into the pan one by one. Having filled the pan to the brim with oil, he turned on the stove, setting it to the highest possible power. While the oil was heating up, he made a torch by wrapping a towel around a wooden handle and securing it with electrical tape. Once the oil was hot enough, he dipped the torch in, letting it soak well. Grabbing the pot to move it closer to the right place, he again gave the command to open the store and purchased another item. Holding the pan tightly, he began to pour the oil into the copy area. The system added hot canola oil to the wish list. After these manipulations, the guy found a lighter. He decided to set fire to the oil-soaked torch. The oil-soaked towel immediately burst into flames, unleashing a large, hot but controlled flame. This was the only hope to deal with the monster, and the young man turned to the window, near which the calican was fussing. The guy didn't have many attempts, as time was running out and the barrier could collapse at any second. Getting as close to the window as he could and fixing his gaze on one point, the young man shouted to the system, calling for canola oil. Outside, a window appeared right in the sky, from which a stream of hot oil flowed down, straight onto the monster. The creature began to scream loudly and writhe in the air, trying to free itself from the burning liquid. This was the time to use the flaming torch. The young man, feeling a surge of adrenaline, was more determined than ever and wished the monster a quick death. After his so-called battle cry, he threw the torch at the bird, and its feathers immediately caught fire. It took only a few seconds for the monster to be completely engulfed in flames. It was another victory, and the guy broke into a wide smile, rejoicing at his success. The monster quickly stopped resisting and rolled his eyes. The monster fell like a stone, leaving only smoke behind. The guy watched as the calican fell to the ground, and just before he landed, realizing what he would see, he grimaced. Even if the monster didn't die from the plans, the fall from such a height would definitely have finished him off. The monster made its last hoarse sound and closed its eyes forever. The house system issued a notification about defeating the Callahan, increasing mastery, and obtaining a new skill. Processing has begun to determine the location of the loot and after receiving the reward. For this victory, almost 10 million won was credited to the guy's wallet, which amazed him immensely. While he was trying to comprehend the amount of his reward, the system notified him of the beginning of the expansion of the house's territory, which definitely shocked the young man. He couldn't understand what exactly was happening, because he had expected that he would simply be able to leave the previous territory and go outside. Some kind of scanning started, and he got caught in it too. He tried not to move and just looked around. His entire apartment acquired gray-green shades under the influence of the scanner, and the guy himself did too. It was not very pleasant both in sensations and visually. So much so that the guy bent down and covered his face with his hands. All that remained was to wait for the territorial expansion to be completed and see what it actually meant. For a very long time, the colors around were unchanged, and it seemed that everything around was frozen. But a little later, he discovered that 4 people had appeared at the table in the living room, as if out of nowhere. This scared the guy even more, because there was no mention of anything like this anywhere. He assumed that these people were neighbors from a nearby house because there was no other explanation at all. Everything around seemed like delirium, and the young man could not understand what was really happening and whether it was true. The people at the table seemed not to notice him and continued to go about their business. The longer the moment lasted, the more it seemed to the guy that he was going crazy. But finally, the strange inner feeling began to dissipate, and reason returned to its place. But those people were still before his eyes, even though in reality, they were no longer there. The curly-haired young man was Choi Hyun-jun. He was a husband and was over 30 years old. The young girl next to him was his wife named Park Hae-won, and she was also over 30 years old. One of the little girls was the first eldest daughter of a young married couple named Choi Na-young, and she was 6 years old. Choi So-yeon's youngest daughter was only 3 years old. The system gave a notification about the discovery of beings that met the requirements for obtaining the status of citizens and asked for permission. The young man decided to enter the room, moving away from the windows. He was interested in what would happen if he did not give this status to people and asked the system this question. The system responded that beings who did not receive citizenship would be expelled from the house, and asked again whether the young man really did not want to recognize those people as citizens. The young man thought that if this was not done, the whole family would be under threat from monsters, and decided to give permission for them to receive the status of citizens. This situation made him realize that he could gain other citizenship-related skills, and he immediately decided to test it. He went to the information block and asked if there was anything about citizenship and its possibilities. In the list, he found the citizenship management section and opened it. Then a list of names of people to whom the young man had given status appeared on the screen. At the bottom, it was clear that the territory could accommodate 600 people. This line shocked the owner of the house very much. It seemed to him that such a number was too large. He selected Choi Hyun-jun from the list, and a menu of managing this person opened in front of him, where he could give a task, view statistics and skills, or banish him. One of the parameters about the speed of distribution of experience and money interested the guy. He assumed that it was about what people could share with him, and he could control this percentage. Now it became clear to him how to become stronger, and a mischievous smile played on his face. Next, the young man selected the function to give a task and asked whether he could give the quest to that person. A new window opened in front of him again, where he had to specify parameters including a reward, time limits, and punishment for failure. He gave the mission to hunt a goblin, set a penalty for failure and a small reward, and gave confirmation. But he was still wondering how far he could go with the penalty for failure. He decided to edit the penalty column and indicated that in case of failure, the person would die and the system would let him through. The guy was completely dejected and canceled the request. It was clear that all it took was the desire of the owner of the house to kill his own citizens at any time. It was within his power, but it sounded very cruel. He was still wondering what he should do next, but he still couldn't decide. After thinking for a bit, he remembered his absolute year's skill, with which he could see everything within his territory. Only after activating this function, the guy again found himself enveloped in a strange substance. It was as if he was in another dimension. But with this skill, the young man really saw everything. He could observe the affairs and listen to the dialogues of others. The husband and wife tried to talk to each other and figure out what they should do next. The husband had no answer to this question and only looked at the woman with regret. The man sat down and got a little angry. He pointed out that he should have gone out and at least gotten some water, and that the girl should have stayed with the children and waited in the house. His wife didn't want to let him in because it was very dangerous outside and no one knew if there was water at all. But the man understood that they had no other choice. He said that he wanted to try to go to the nearest store, and since it was quite big, there was a chance that he would find at least something in it. The children, hearing their parents' conversation, moaned loudly that they were very thirsty. The mother wanted to calm her daughter So-yeon down, but the father loudly banged his fists on the table, indicating that he had already made his decision and would go outside. The man took his wife by the hand and asked if she trusted him, and then promised that he would definitely bring something, and the girl with the children only had to wait a little for him. The girl understood that she might see her husband for the last time, and her chances of surviving on the street were very small. At this point, the young man dispelled the absolute vision and returned to the reality in front of him. The situation was much worse than he thought, and he immediately opened a store. Looking over his list of items, he thought about how nice it would be to be able to store more items at once and then opened the skill window. After looking at his skills, which included storage, store, and resuming home functions, the guy jumped up happily. He decided to increase the level of the absolute recluse shop skill, which increased the number of items in the product list. Moreover, a 10% discount was applied to the prices of all items, which was also very nice. Then the guy thought about which skill to improve next because he still had 2 points left. He thought he should invest more in the store and maintaining his dignity, since he could meet even more citizens. The young man upgraded the store by another level, which increased the list to 40 items and made it possible to restore old items and turn them into new ones. This made him happy, because raising the store level to the third was worth it. The guy opened the store to make purchases. He chose water and Jeju tangerines and confirmed the order, and then decided to level up his other skills. Next, he increased the level of the skill of maintaining the dignity of an absolute recluse, believing that if he could provide his neighbors with electricity and water, he would be able to ask for a lot of things in return. Leveling up added the ability to register vassals, which left the owner confused. Meanwhile, the head of that family had gathered himself and was ready to go outside to find at least some water for his children and wife. The wife, holding the children close to her, was very worried about him and did not want to let him go, although she understood that they had no other choice. The man smiled and hugged the children, promising that he would return and asking the family to protect the house while he was gone. His daughters, although very young, understood that their father was going to a very dangerous place and modestly asked him about it. The father repeated that he should have brought water and food, and stroking the girls' hair, asked them to obey their mother. The youngest daughter could not hold back her tears and began to cry loudly and began to say that there were monsters on the street where her father was going. The little girl remembered how just recently she and her sister had played in the sandbox and built castles. Out of nowhere, very suddenly they saw goblins rushing towards them in a huge crowd, shouting and growling. This moment was etched into the girls' memories, and it is unlikely that they would ever be able to forget it. Choi Na-young jumped up and lay forward, dragging her younger sister along with her, who couldn't take her eyes off the monsters. Very soon their father ran to their aid, and picking them up in his arms, they all ran together to a safe place, home. The goblins didn't break away at all, and ran literally on his heels, threatening to catch up with him at any moment and tear him to pieces. Choi Hyun-jun also remembered that day, and could barely hold back his tears, because he understood that if he was unlucky enough to meet the goblins, he would never return to his family. Park Hae-won, his wife, tried to calm the crying children, convincing them that everything was fine and they shouldn't worry so much. Hyun-jun looked at his daughters and realized that this might be the last time he would see them. A lump was rising in his throat and his breath was shaking with excitement, but he had to get going already. But suddenly there was a loud and insistent knock on the front door. The woman hugged the children and held them tightly to her while Hyun-jung took a defensive stance with a golf club. They kept knocking on the door, but the family hid and barely breathed, so as not to give themselves away and survive. The knocking stopped, and for a short time only silence could be heard. The door handle began to twitch, and a voice was heard from behind the door. Someone apologized and asked to be let into the apartment. Hyun-jun froze in horror, not knowing what to do. He knew that the monsters did not speak their language, but opening the doors was still dangerous. But on the other hand, his family had not seen living people for a very long time, and the fact that a person was knocking on their door was a surprise. There were risks from humans too. His family could be killed and their remaining supplies taken. While Hyun-jun was thinking about what to do, a voice came from behind the door again, asking if there was anyone in the apartment. Hyun-jun was very hesitant about opening the doors and was ready to fight whoever was standing there. Hye-won covered the girls' mouths and everyone tried not to make a sound. They continued trying to open the door, either pulling the handle or knocking with their fists. But then the sounds died down, and a rustling sound was heard, which gradually began to fade away. It became quiet again, just like before the uninvited guest, but it was impossible to look outside. Hyun-jun quietly asked his wife if the man outside the door had left, as he himself could not tell for sure. The man did not take his eyes off the doors, expecting that the doors would open any minute and his family would be in danger. And indeed, the doors opened, and the apartment was flooded with bright light. The man's eyes widened, and he froze where he stood, afraid to move. A few seconds later, he rushed towards his wife and children, covering them with himself and screaming loudly, begging them not to touch him. The wife and girls were also scared and started screaming. The man pressed them to himself and asked them to leave them alone. But unexpectedly for Hyun-jun, the guest who entered apologized and sounded somewhat perplexed. The man opened his eyes and looked at the person who broke into his house. A young guy stood at the threshold, smiling slightly. He didn't look like someone who was going to do harm, but rather friendly. Hyun-jun still did not let go of his family's embrace and timidly asked who the young man was. The guy introduced himself as Kim Jae-hyun and explained that he lived next door to them. He was holding 2 bags in his hands, clearly not empty. Jae-hyun explained that he had brought water and tangerines and suggested that they talk after the family drank and ate. Hyun-jun still didn't trust the stranger, because in the world they found themselves in now, it was difficult to trust anyone. But he still stood up timidly, releasing his wife and children from his embrace and looked at them. They looked very tucked up, frightened. Hyunjun bowed politely, noting that he had no reason to refuse food and water, and turning to the family out loud suggested that their neighbor could be trusted and would be able to help. Hyunjun invited Jae-hyun to come into his apartment, where they could talk about everything. The children looked at Jae-hyun with great suspicion from behind their parents' backs. The young man was a little confused because he saw that the children were very scared, but he didn't want this at all. Jae-hyun looked around and saw that there were curtains on the windows blocking out the light, and he thought to himself that it was very smart. The young man noted that such curtains really did reduce the likelihood of monster attacks. To begin with, Jae-hyun decided to turn on the light in these people's apartment, and then tell them about everything else. He focused on the lamp and gave the command to turn on the light. The room was immediately filled with bright, albeit artificial light, which made the family shudder, but this time from surprise. Interrupting the speech about returning the light, Jae-hyun suggested to Hyunjun to first give the children water and food, and he happily accepted the revision. He handed out a bottle of water to the girls one by one. The children looked at the water as if it were the most delicious cake in the world, if only it hadn't come to an end. Only after receiving the bottles in their hands did the girls begin to drink greedily. It was obvious that this family had been suffering from thirst for a very long time. Seo-yeon, the youngest daughter, drank so much that she was short of breath. This reaction alarmed the parents a little, and everyone rushed to the girl. Jae-hyun didn't understand how to behave in such a situation, especially with small children, and decided to wait until the parents themselves were sure that everything was okay with their child. After the girl caught her breath, the young man took a tangerine out of the bag and offered it to her, asking if she liked such fruits. So-yeon was initially reluctant to accept the tangerine from a stranger, but Jae-hyun placed the fruit in her hand and she modestly accepted it and quietly thanked him. Hae-won, the girl's mother, offered to help her peel the fruit, and the girl handed the tangerine to her mother. It was obvious that she was already impatient to eat it. The woman peeled the tangerine, broke off a slice and handed it to her daughter. She placed the tangerine directly into the girl's mouth, showing special tenderness and maternal care. The child's eyes immediately lit up from the incredible sweetness of the fruit after such a difficult few days of hunger. There was no need to ask if she liked it. Everything was visible without unnecessary questions. Hyewon smiled sweetly, asking her daughter if it was tasty, and she, without hesitation, clearly answered that it was. Na-yeon, the eldest daughter, came closer and asked to take a slice of tangerine too. And her emotions were the same. Jae-hyun definitely managed to conquer the children. The young man received a notification that the whole family had increased his trust and loyalty parameter, but each one was different. Next, a notice appeared that Choi So-yeon met the requirements to register as a vassal. The young man saw that the girl had fulfilled all the requirements to be registered as a vassal. But there was a nuance. The girl was too young for such a status, and this upset Jae-hyun a little. Unlike citizens, he could only register 10 vassals. They had to be at least at Choi Hyunjun's level and able to carry out the youth's orders. But Choi Hyunjun's trust was only 31 points. The young man began to think about what he needed to do to make the man trust him more. But his thoughts were interrupted by Hyunjun himself, which greatly frightened the guy. Hyunjun thanked him and said that he didn't even know how he could repay the guy for such kindness. Jae-hyun drew out the sentence a little and suggested that in that case they go outside the apartment together and discuss everything. Hyunjun was a little worried but still agreed. It was daytime outside, and the corridor was very well lit. Plus, there were no monsters visible outside the window, so it was quite safe to be outside the apartment. Hyunjun was a little nervous because he didn't know what the guy would ask for in exchange for water and some food. For a short time, the two of them stood in complete silence. Jae-hyun was also very worried because he didn't know how to start the conversation correctly, but he still decided to ask if Hyunjun had received citizenship. Hyunjun opened the screen, and from the notifications it seemed like his entire family had received citizenship about half an hour ago. Jae-hyun asked if there was anything special about the event, to which the man replied that the whole family was unable to move for some time. This seemed quite strange to Jae-hyun. The entire family was frozen during the citizenship application until the system had fully processed all the information. After thinking for a bit, Jae-hyun decided that there was no point in dragging out this conversation for long, and turned to Mr. Choi. The guy explained that he could help the man and his entire family return to the life they had before everything that was happening outside. Mr. Choi became even more agitated. Fear was visible on his face. He thought that the guy's offer was untrue. Jae-hyun continued to explain what he could do to prevent monsters from entering Mr. Choi's family's apartment. Hyun-jun did not believe that this was possible and openly shared his doubts. Jae-hyun assured that it was indeed possible and he would help. Choi Hyun-jun was lost in his thoughts. He was very worried and needed some time to process all the information he had received. After some thought, he said that he understood perfectly well that it would not be free and asked what he should do to receive such a privilege. Jae-hyun explained that the man could lose his life and asked again if he was sure he agreed to such conditions. Naturally, it was very difficult to make such a decision. The future fate of his wife and daughters lay on this man's shoulders, and he had little choice. Gathering his strength, he resolutely replied that he agreed to such conditions because he was obliged to do everything for his family, especially since he still had to go outside for food and water. And he explained to me that he had already put his life on the line for the survival of his family. Jae-hyun smiled slightly at this. After letting Mr. Choi finish speaking, Jae-hyun recalled the golf club he had seen in the man's hands and asked how much it cost. This question was quite unexpected, but after thinking for a bit, Mr. Choi replied that a golf club cost about 400,000 or 500,000 won. Hearing the price, Jae-hyun thought that it was too expensive to add the hockey stick to the list. Now he needed to save money for the future. Mr. Choi expected some kind of explanation as to why the guy needed such information and still asked about it, but the young man waved his hands and asked to simply forget about this question. Jae-hyun then asked the man if he remembered the day he first saw monsters. Mr. Choi's face immediately changed. He replied that it happened last weekend. The crowd of evil goblins still seemed to be right in front of him. It was a truly terrifying sight for him, and he shared these thoughts with Jae-hyun. Jae-hyun supported him and told a rumor that suggested that everyone who stayed home that day was able to survive. A single goblin did not have much strength, and these creatures were much more dangerous when they gathered in crowds. The goblin's level was also lower than that of an adult man, and the real strength of the freaks was that they always moved in groups. Well, the same could be said about people. One person by himself could not change the situation as a whole, but if we talk about a group of people, they would be able to resist the monsters. Jae-hyun began to think that first he needed to raise his own army. With this thought stuck in his mind, the young man turned to Mr. Choi again. The young man asked the man that from that moment on, they would work together to search for all survivors in the area. As evening approached, Jae-hyun and Mr. Choi dispersed to their apartments. The high-rise building they lived in remained in complete darkness, and only 2 apartments attracted attention with light. Jae-hyun was sitting on the couch when the system issued a new notification about the increase in Mr. Choi's trust, which of course made the young man a little happy. He thought that he would eventually be able to meet his family members as he continued to slowly accept people. He really wanted to believe in this theory. His thoughts were interrupted by some very loud screams in the street, which made him jump out of bed in great fright. He immediately ran to the window, hoping he could see what was happening. When he looked out into the street, he became even more frightened by what he saw. Below, Jae-hyun saw a group of people fighting a crowd of goblins. Both sides were shouting loudly. Jae-hyun immediately began to think about how he could help people, but he understood that it would be very difficult to do. The goblins were more furious than ever. These creatures were ready to tear apart everyone and everything in their path. People did not retreat and tried in every way to deal with the army of monsters, showing extraordinary courage. They threw whatever objects they could find at the goblins. One of the goblins was killed with a baseball. When one of the monsters fell, the others became even more angry and prepared to attack. Jae-hyun, watching this whole scene from above, was greatly amazed by both the capabilities and courage of the people and the strength of the goblins. Jae-hyun immediately noticed the girl standing behind his group, holding a bow and shooting arrows at the goblins. She certainly had a very high skill in shooting. Every arrow she fired hit its target. Very quickly, the number of goblins began to decrease. The rest succumbed to fear and began to foolishly fuss about on the battlefield. Taking advantage of this moment, the rest of the people began to attack the remaining creatures more actively. One of the men ran up and jumped forward, destroying one of the goblins with a dumbbell for sports, which surprised Jae-hyun even more. The goblins ran away, realizing that they would not be able to defeat their enemies. The best solution was to simply save their lives. Having dispersed all the monsters, the group began to huddle together, emerging from ambushes. The girl suddenly heard some sound and began to look around sharply. She was ready to fire another one of her arrows, but stopped herself in time. On the ground, she saw a pack of instant noodles that had fallen from somewhere below. Raising her head, she saw a light burning in the apartment and a young man waving his hands to attract attention. Jae-hyun really hoped that the girl was able to see him, and that he would be able to build at least some kind of contact with this group. The girl watched the guy's strange movements with bewilderment, but what surprised her most was the electricity that was connected in that apartment. Jae-hyun started waving his arms even harder and shouting for people to come up to him. But he didn't have to stop for long because there was a knock at the door. It was Hyun-jun, who they had agreed to meet that evening. The man waited nervously for the doors to be opened for him, holding a large box in his hands. Jae-hyun hurried to open the door for him and kindly invited him to enter the apartment. Mr. Choi thanked him and timidly entered Jae-hyun's apartment carrying the box. Well, he never managed to get into the apartment. A barrier appeared in the doorway that didn't let him in. Jae-hyun didn't expect this turn of events at all, because he was sure that this person would be able to enter without any problems. The system gave a notification that unqualified people could enter the house, which caused Mr. Choi to ask a question. He did not know what this could mean. Jae-hyun himself didn't quite understand what the problem was. He still hadn't fully figured out some of the subtleties. He couldn't believe that no one could get to him now because of certain functions of his apartment. He suggested that only those who were registered as vassals would be able to enter the apartment. Hyun-jun handed the box to Jae-hyun and explained that he had put everything that could be used as a weapon in it. Jae-hyun thanked him and immediately began to unpack the contents. From the box, he took out a set of tools and several large meat knives. After laying out the items on the floor, the young man opened the store and purchased 5 bottles of water and 5 packages of ramen. Mr. Choi still remained near the door and was very surprised when he saw how the system created the requested goods before his eyes. Jae-hyun asked Mr. Choi to go to the first floor and put these products at the entrance, if he didn't mind such a request. Hyun-jun was not very happy with this task because he considered the first floor to be a very dangerous place, since goblins could easily get there. Jae-hyun assured him that after some observation, he found out that the goblins were only active during the day, and since it was already night outside, going to the first floor was quite safe. His goal was to attract people he saw on the street and try to talk to them. It was not known whether these people were friendly or whether they posed any danger to him or Mr. Choi's family. But this was the only opportunity at that time to somehow connect with the outside world. Jae-hyun believed that people would have no choice but to come to him when they realized that he had food. Jae-hyun explained to the gentleman that he had a certain plan. These products needed to be taken downstairs. The man asked whether it was worth leaving the provisions on the first floor and returning or whether it was worth doing something else. I really liked Jae-hyun's indecisiveness, but he kept his cool and confirmed that it was worth just taking the groceries and going back. Hyun-jun, wanting to appear brave, emphasized that it was a simple task, and it was clear that he was very worried. Mr. Choi bowed politely and said goodbye. Jae-hyun found it hard to encourage this man. He just wanted him to be a little more decisive. But he needed to work on building trust. So he thanked Choi Hyun-jun for his understanding and help. He wanted to do something for a guy like him and opened the task window and outlined certain parameters for completing the task given to the gentleman. When Hyun-jun saw the reward for this quest, he was surprised because as a reward he could get some experience, which was good. The man still didn't fully understand what this could mean and asked the young man if this was some kind of level increase, but he was still happy about it. Jae-hyun explained that Mr. Choi was level 9, and when he rose to level 10, he would be able to receive good rewards, and smilingly indicated that he would count on him. Mr. Choi was impressed by the information about the levels and rewards, but it was still quite difficult to fully understand. After saying goodbye to Jae-hyun, Mr. Choi immediately went to carry out his assignment. He armed himself with a golf club and stood for a while in front of the door leading to the exit. It was hard for him to decide on the next step. Plucking up his courage, Hyun-jun finally opened the doors and began to descend the stairs. He walked through floor after floor, and the excitement grew stronger and stronger. After some time, he finally reached the first floor and simply went outside. It was creepy, and it was dark and difficult to see any danger if there was one. Mr. Choi walked forward and tried to encourage and calm himself down by saying that all he had to do was put the box in the designated place, and he would be able to quickly go home. He looked around timidly until he heard some voices very close. Looking closely, he saw several human silhouettes, but the conversation was incomprehensible. It was more like incomprehensible sounds than human speech. The man immediately imagined that these were not people at all, but various monsters who would eat him for dinner, and he was overcome with uncontrollable fear. He ducked down and decided that he should run before he could be noticed and harmed in any way. But to his misfortune, he turned his foot literally on level ground and fell. The water and noodles fell out of the box, making a lot of noise, as did Mr. Choi's fall. The man couldn't move from the spot because of the intense fear that he had in his clutches. He was shaking all over, thinking that he had attracted too much attention to himself. He forced himself to move forward and seek salvation, even though his body was not obeying him at all. Turning around a little and seeing what was happening around him, he allowed fear to take even more control over himself. Mr. Choi prepared himself for an attack and covered himself with his hands from the supposed enemies, whom he did not even have time to properly examine. But closing his eyes tightly, he heard some person call out to him, and this made him open his words again and relax a little. In front of him, he saw a group of people, both men and women. They looked quite worried and began to ask if the gentleman was okay. Sometime later, after Mr. Choi went to take the box outside, the system notified Jae-hyun that some unauthorized entity was trying to enter the house. The young man became a little worried, but first he decided to find out what was actually happening downstairs. He used his all-vision skill to check the situation on the first floor. Using the absolute eyes skill, he was able to scan all the floors. Well, on the first floor, he discovered that Mr. Choi and roughly those people who were fighting for the goblins were already near the house and were trying to go further. The girl immediately realized that this was the same residential building from which someone had thrown out a package of ramen. Others picked her up. I hope there were food supplies inside. Find their supplies were already running low. Upon learning that Hyun-jun had managed to attract the attention of those very people who were on the street, Jae-hyun was overjoyed. The system gave a new notification that creatures were approaching that met the requirements for obtaining the status of citizens, and now the young man had to make a decision. In the process of expanding his territory, he could forcibly grant citizenship to those who were on it, but as it turned out, outsiders were given a choice. In that case, they would most likely reject his offer, and that would create a lot of problems. Jae-hyun couldn't make up his mind. He couldn't think of what he should do so quickly. Nervously, he tapped his forehead, forcing himself to come up with some kind of plan as quickly as possible. At that moment, his attention was drawn to the intercom, which began to make some sounds. And finally, at least some idea was born in Jae-hyun's head. He decided to relax and see what would happen, and try to make it come true. He answered the call, and Mr. Choi's image appeared on the screen. The man was excited and immediately began to demand an answer from the young man, who still had not said a word. Jae-hyun asked the man to wait a little and opened the task editing window. Without hesitation, he chose to confirm his decision in the appropriate window, after which the system gave consent to edit the data and asked to make changes. Jae-hyun added a task to Mr. Choi, which required him to treat 6 guests. Mr. Choi immediately received an update on his assignment, and Jae-hyun confirmed that everything was correct. Jae-hyun asked the gentleman to tell the group that he would give them food first and explained that he had some thoughts about this situation. Hyun-jun agreed and turned to the people who were waiting at the entrance in front of the barrier. Hyun-jun came closer and, spreading his arms in a friendly manner, invited the guests to come with him. After receiving the agreement, he immediately contacted Jae-hyun and reported the news. Jae-hyun told Hyun-jun to immediately offer them citizenship and report back the answer. Upon being offered citizenship, the group was given access to the house and were able to pass through the protective barrier. In a moment, the whole group was inside and therefore safe. Everyone looked happy and was looking forward to a nice dinner. The system gave Jae-hyun a notification that the number of citizens had reached 10 people. The amount of experience and money that his citizens earned had increased by 10%. Jae-hyun was fired up because together they would get very good buffs and go hunting monsters, and he was very happy to accept people with open arms. Jae-hyun looked at everyone's stats as the group climbed up. Ha Dong-gun was level 23, exactly the same strength as the calican the boy had been lucky enough to kill. Dong-gun also had the ability of a baseball throw, which used stamina to increase the power of the ball 3 times. Jae-hyun thought that he was a superhuman. Depending on who threw the baseball, this object could become a weapon. And if the skill multiplies its power 3 times, then it will be ideal for killing monsters. Jae-hyun began to think about this guy's trust in him. He suggested that he could just slowly increase the value and set the experience distribution coefficient for all 6 of them to 70%. The setup is complete and the parameters have been set. Now Jae-hyun had to hand out the monster hunting quest to everyone, and he was just going to sit and earn experience and money as if he was hunting in a game. He understood that of course he would need to get to know everyone better when the time came. He believed that they could be the key to connecting him with his family. Quite unexpectedly, the system again issued a notification that Ha Dong-gun's trust had increased, although there was no reason for this before. Immediately after, more notifications appeared about the increase in trust and other new citizens. Just then, Mr. Choi led the group up to his apartment on the top floor and invited them in. His wife was shocked by the appearance of guests and, frightened, immediately ran to the court to find out what was going on. Hyun-jun promised to explain everything later and asked to prepare food for everyone. The girl became even more embarrassed and noted that she would have to start from scratch, showing that she did not want to do it. Mr. Choi asked for help, explaining that Jae-hyun apparently had a plan. The girl could not decide to give her consent. But he was her husband, and she should trust him. Sighing and collecting her thoughts, Hye-won agreed and promised to do everything as quickly as possible. Afterwards, she turned to the guests and asked them to also wait a little, to which she received a respectful bow and gratitude. One of the guys in the group was very interested in the short conversation between Hyun-jung and his wife. He didn't delay and immediately asked Mr. Choi who that Jae-hyun who was mentioned was, but the gentleman himself didn't know and gave an appropriate answer, confusedly rubbing behind his ear. The group unanimously expressed their surprise, and the man affirmatively repeated that he really didn't know anything about Jae-hyun, except that he was his neighbor. The guy who asked the question was very surprised and even more interested when he learned about such an interesting neighborhood. Mr. Choi, walking into the hall, noted that Jae-hyun was still quite an intriguing person, and they received all the benefits of civilization thanks to his help. The guy chuckled thoughtfully and concluded that Jae-hyun was a superhuman. He glanced at the noodles he had been given that were hidden in his jacket and guessed that Jae-hyun must have had some amazing abilities to be able to provide all of this. The guy decided that he had to make an impression on Jae-hyun and do it better than everyone else. He believed that Mr. Choi's mysterious neighbor was the one who was powerful enough to provide electricity, food, and water during the apocalypse. In the modern world, this was simply a miracle, and the guy was sure that this man was on a different level. Mr. Choi noted that preparing the food would take some time and suggested that the guests take a shower in the meantime. The girls were especially impressed. They, like no one else, desperately wanted to swim and return to the view before the end of the world. The guy concluded for himself that since there was electricity, then apparently it was possible to use most of the amenities. Mr. Choi laughed and assured the girls that there was hot water in the house and that this was also part of Jae-hyun's abilities. The girls couldn't believe their ears. The presence of hot water seemed like a real miracle. Mr. Choi said that the bathroom was in the living room and bedroom, and that two people could wash together and offered to show us where to go. While the girls were completely absorbed in the joy of the hot water, the boys were talking among themselves. They discussed that it was quite possible that Jae-hyun was a superhuman and his abilities were much more powerful than Ha Dong-gun. Another guy shook Dong-gun by the shoulder and said that there was no need to despair and that all he had to do was give his opponent a good beating, to which Dong-gun was indignant, replying that they, on the contrary, should impress him. The young man immediately removed the smile from his face, apparently thinking that they would fight for this place. But Dong-gun asked him to just keep quiet and do nothing. He laughed and promised that he would not do anything of his own free will, and Dong-gun continued his speech. He reminded his friends that their main goal was to get as much food as possible and they couldn't screw up, and first they should study the room well. The boys one by one meekly agreed. Dong-gun had his own voice in this group and was respected by the others. Although among them, there was one who was not going to obey in everything and still do it his own way. One of the guys stood to the side with a very sad look. Dong-gun couldn't ignore this and went to him to find out what was going on and if he needed to calm down. The guy's name was Ben-ho. Dong-gun put his hand on his shoulder. He flinched in surprise and apologized because he had missed everything. Dong-gun apologized himself, saying that it was all his fault, but Ben-ho tried to convince him that he had done nothing wrong. Ben-ho repeated that he was truly sorry because things could have been different if only he hadn't invited them to the housewarming party. Ben-ho smiled and assured that everything was fine, because he went because he wanted to. The guys got together and Dong-gun suggested having a snack and going to Ben-ho's grandmother, to which he modestly agreed and thanked him for his support. But in reality, these words did not give him any relief, and he became even more depressed. Thoughts were running through his head that it was too late. Many horrors took place on the streets of the city, and many terrible things could have happened. Ben-ho knew that the chances that his grandmother was still alive were slim to none. The boys started to come up with a plan. They said that Ben-ho's grandmother lived very close to where they were, and they would be able to get there if they acted together, and it was worth being patient for a little while. Ben-ho agreed but wanted to add something else when he heard some extraneous rustling. Everyone turned towards the entrance doors where the sounds were coming from. The door slowly began to open, but due to the complete darkness in the corridor, it was difficult to see who or what was behind the door. The guys froze in place as a human silhouette finally appeared from behind the door. Dong-gun immediately took out his baseball and prepared to defend himself. When Jae-hyun entered the room, the company immediately felt an unusual feeling. Jae-hyun came in saying that he would help everyone and would not leave anyone in trouble or alone. Donggon lowered his hand with the ball, realizing that it was not an enemy who had entered the apartment. Each of the group members felt that Jae-hyun could really save them and that he was worth trusting. He will be able to save them from this pit of despair and give them relief. Jae-hyun and everyone else sat down at the table and waited for the long-awaited dinner. Hee-won walked from the kitchen into the hall and, smiling sweetly, noted that it was probably a bit dark for everyone. Donggon smiled back and assured the hostess that everything was fine, especially since it was his group that had crashed without warning. Hyun-jun followed his wife out with a tray of rice and emphasized that she had eaten on the way. He placed plates of hot, fragrant rice in front of each guest, and everyone was amazed to see hot, home-cooked food after long days of hard survival. Hae-won said that she wasn't sure everyone would like her cooking and smiled awkwardly. On the table, there was rice, fried eggs, green salads, a roll and several other dishes that looked extremely appetizing and tempted with their smell. The girl took the chopsticks and reached for the roll, deciding not to be modest and to satisfy her hunger as quickly as possible. She was definitely speechless. She tried to convey her emotions, but there were too many of them. Unable to contain them, the girl almost screamed that everything was completely fine, or rather simply amazing, and for her belly it was a real holiday. Hae-won covered her face with her hands out of embarrassment and said that the table was set thanks to the ingredients that Jae-hyun gave her. Otherwise, she would only offer rice and tangerines. Immediately, Jae-hyun received a notification from the system that Park Hae-won's trust had increased to 50 points, and he was surprised that this happened to her before her husband. Everyone was very pleased with the set table and kept thanking us for the excellent food and all the other amenities. There was no more conversation at the table because no one could tear themselves away from their food even for a moment. All the dishes were gobbled up by the guests and there was nothing that was not to their taste. One of the girls began to praise the egg roll, which she found particularly tasty, and she noted that it was served like this in Japanese restaurants. Hae-won smiled and confirmed that this was indeed the case, and at that moment one of her daughters approached her with some question. The girl asked for an egg roll, assuring her that she was very hungry. The woman sighed quietly before answering. She straightened her daughter's hair and promised to make her a roll after the guests had eaten, and the girl agreed with great sadness. But the girl from the table called So-yeon over and offered to eat the egg roll together, and the little girl's eyes immediately lit up. The girl jumped up and ran towards the stranger, who apparently quickly won her heart. The girl sat the child in her arms and reached for the roll to hand it to the girl. Taking out a piece of roll, the girl asked So-yeon to say, "Ah," as everyone says to little children. The girl accepted the treat with great gratitude and was very pleased with it. So-yeon's parents felt incredibly ashamed because the girl shouldn't have done such a thing. Jae-hyun asked them to sit down and join the dinner, assuring them that there was enough food for everyone. Hae-won and Hyun-jun looked at each other slightly confused and decided to agree. They were very awkward, but the couple still smiled and joined their guests. The room was silent again for a while. Everyone was thinking about their own things and enjoying a quiet evening and delicious food. Jae-hyun noted to himself how long it had been since he had eaten such delicious home-cooked food. Before his eyes appeared containers of food and notes from his mother who left them. He tried not to give in to bad thoughts and hoped that his whole family was safe. The wonderful dinner was eaten down to the last crumbs. After eating her fill, So-yeon immediately began to rub her eyes and told her mother that she really wanted to sleep. Hae-won picked up the little girl to carry her to the crib and called her older daughter to follow her so she could put her to bed as well. Jae-hyun tried to concentrate and gather his thoughts. He suggested ending the conversation and discussing everything important. Jae-hyun glanced at Donggun and asked the group why they couldn't go to Grandma's if she was so close. Donggun answered for everyone that they couldn't do it because of the goblins that were filling the city. Jae-hyun asked again if he had misheard, and Donggun confirmed that the reason was indeed the goblins. Donggun said that it looked like the underground parking lot was a place to hide, and probably for this reason, the goblins decided to make it their base. Jae-hyun thought about it, and Donggun continued and said that they estimated that there were at least a couple thousand goblins in that place. Jae-hyun thought that the absolute recluse system only worked up to the 30th floor, and the goblins could enter through the underground levels. Donggun noted that they saw that all the entrances to the apartments were connected to the subway, and therefore they could not bring themselves to leave. Jae-hyun noted that if his memory served him correctly, there were other routes, which Donggun confirmed and shared that their original goal was to use the nearby road and get out. One of the guys noted that there was a monster that looked much more dangerous than the usual goblins, which made Jae-hyun shudder in fear. Donggun swallowed the lump in his throat and replied that this monster looked like a wolf or a bear. Moments from that meeting in the underground parking garage flashed before his eyes. He explained that they were only able to escape because the monster was fighting a group of goblins and was distracted. Jae-hyun thought for a moment, analyzing all the information he had received from the guys. Dong-gon bowed his head and added that they didn't know exactly what was there since it was very dark and it was difficult to see anything. Jae-hyun collected his thoughts, straightened up and looked to the side, noting that in the end they couldn't avoid these monsters forever, and sooner or later they would have to meet. Dong-gon agreed with his words but pointed out that they had some limits. Jae-hyun looked at him curiously and asked what exactly he was talking about. The girl intervened in the conversation and explained that they use bows and throw baseballs, but sooner or later it will simply end. Jae-hyun understood what the boys were getting at and reassured them that he could solve the problem and asked permission to look at their arrows and baseballs. The group showed their weapons to Jae-hyun without hesitation, dumping them on the table in front of him. Jae-hyun immediately opened the online store window and added the necessary products to the list. Well, when it was time to buy onions, Jae-hyun hesitated a little, having received a new notification from the system. The archery bow cost 1.5 million won, and it took Jae-hyun a minute to finally decide to add it to the list. He then turned to the boys and asked if they could all use a bow. The group sat there grinning from ear to ear when they saw that he was going to buy them everything they needed. Although the boys did not answer him because they were shocked, Jae-hyun made the decision to buy 5 sets of bows and arrows on his own. He addressed the boys and noted that even if they didn't know how, they would take advantage of this chance to practice. And from now on, they would all use bows. After this statement, the system issued a notification that several guys had significantly increased their trust in Jae-hyun. Ben-ho thought to herself that if his team worked well with Jae-hyun, the chances of saving his grandmother would increase, and he was very happy about it. Dong-gon imagined himself on a chair and examining the weapon, noted that with it the speed of hunting would become much higher, and there would be no need to get out of serious situations. His comrade noted that if he could, you would generally need to expose yourself to the danger that there would be arrows. At this point, Jae-hyun made another statement and said that before they continued, they should significantly reduce the number of goblins. Dong-gon agreed out loud and asked when they would start hunting. Jae-hyun briefly replied that they would start hunting tomorrow, which greatly surprised the others. To their surprised looks, Jae-hyun replied that the sooner they started, the better. The guys probably didn't expect the situation to develop so quickly, but they were glad that they would be able to save Ben-ho's grandmother tomorrow. Ben-ho was grinning from ear to ear. He was happy that they were finally going to do something. But Dong-gun was more interested in how they would do it and asked Jae-hyun about it. Jae-hyun looked at the guy and explained that they would not use the bait strategy. All the guys fell into silence, thinking about what they had heard and trying to guess what exactly it meant. The girl noted that perhaps achieving their goal was not so realistic. Let's hear what Jae-hyun says. The other guy only cared that it worked and that none of them got hurt. Suddenly, the system issued a notification again, indicating that Hyunjun had completed the task and the cost was 30,000 won. Jae-hyun never expected that he would have to spend money on this when he was already short of it. He realized that only through the availability of money could he raise the level of citizens. But since at that moment there was no urgent need for it, he decided that for now there was no need to do it. Then came the notifications about the increase in trust of his citizens, and especially Hyunjun, who could now be registered as a vassal. Hyunjun's whole body lit up, indicating some changes that he didn't know about yet. Hyunjun spoke out loud to the others, asking if they had seen something flash. This glow indicated that Jae-hyun had registered him as a vassal, his level had risen, and his gorilla strength ability had awakened. Now the experience money received when killing a monster was doubled, but Jae-hyun was interested in the button that appeared on the screen. Clicking on it brought up a confirmation window. The system asked if Jae-hyun really wanted to spend 1 million won to level up Hyunjun. Jae-hyun was shocked by the amount. The girl immediately noticed that Jae-hyun's face had changed somehow and asked him about it, but he brushed the question aside and asked him to tell her how everyone else was feeling. Hyunjun clenched his fist and noted that it was filled with strength. He asked Jae-hyun if it was his doing and Jae-hyun confirmed it. Hyunjun noted that he felt like he had become 10 years younger and felt great. This made Jae-hyun smile because everything was going according to his plan, and now he also had a powerful vassal. Jae-hyun handed the bow to Hyunjun and indicated that he would also be taking part in the operation this time. This statement shocked the man. Citizens received a bonus of 10% additional experience, and due to the double effect of the citizen, he will be able to gain even more experience. Jae-hyun was happy about this, and handed the bow to Hyunjun and asked him to make sure to try to kill as many monsters as possible. The man trembled with fear, but obediently promised to do so. Jae-hyun laughed and tried to cheer the man up by saying that he really believed in him. Soon the whole group headed down to the first floor to practice and clear the way for the main objective. One of the guys approached Dong-gon and asked if they had to check the first floor. We note that he had previously seen that all the windows there were broken, but he didn't want to talk about the condition at all. Dong-gun replied that they still needed to check everything, because that's what Jae-hyun said, and they came here as a rescue team. That was the first mission. All the survivors in this apartment building had to be sent to the 30th floor. Their mission in this operation was to attract and kill as many goblins as possible inside the house. Besides that, they had to find at least one survivor. Dong-gon repeated this to everyone so that the others would set this as a goal. Comrade Dong-gona grinned and stepped forward to answer so that everything would be understood. Then the squad went to carry out the task. Dong-gon suggested starting the search and cleanup from the 101st apartment and warned that they didn't know where they might run into a goblin and they should be on guard. Everything around looked terrible. There were traces of blood and struggle on the walls, number plates, doors. Well, the guys fearlessly stepped forward to search the first apartments. They should have behaved as quietly and carefully as possible. When they entered the first apartment, horror made them freeze in place. The girls barely held back their urge to vomit and turned away so as not to see what was in the apartment. Everything around was covered in blood. On the floor lay several corpses of the family that once lived here. This spectacle was not at all for the faint of heart, and even the guys had a hard time containing their emotions. Dong-gon immediately turned around and ordered everyone to leave the apartment since the goblins were no longer there and there was no one to save. It was very hard to take. One of the guys, out of anger and resentment, gripped his bat very tightly and stepped forward. The boys approached the broken window, through which the goblins most likely climbed into the house. Dong-gon covered his eyes with his hand and cursed, noting that no one on the first floor had a chance of survival. He exhaled heavily and ordered to go up to the second floor and continue the search there. No one needed to be told twice, and the entire squad immediately went to the second floor, away from the horrors they had seen. But on the second floor, they were met by a picture much worse than the previous one. The entire corridor was littered with corpses of people who had not been able to defeat the bloodthirsty monsters. This sight made everything inside me turn over and shrink. The guys froze in their places again, trying to recover from what they saw. Dong-gon decided that they shouldn't look at everything in detail and immediately gave the command to go up to the third floor. There was hope that the third floor would not suffer the same horrors that the floors and their inhabitants below were subjected to. On the third floor, the situation was much better. There was no blood on the walls or floor, and no dead people were visible scattered around the corridors. Dong-gon immediately began knocking on the nearest apartment and asking if there was anyone inside. The others followed his example and went to the nearby apartments. Everyone started knocking on doors, hoping that someone would answer them. Hyunjun also started knocking on apartment doors, hoping that some of his neighbors managed to survive. But unfortunately, no one came out of any of the apartments, and this was a huge disappointment for everyone. Dong-gon was having a hard time with these failures. He and his group had seen enough horrors. The silence that reigned on the floor did not bode well. Not wanting to linger and waste time, the squad immediately went to the fourth floor. Everything repeated itself. Dong-gon and his comrades again began knocking on all the apartments in the hope that at least there they would be able to find someone. Suddenly, the door that Dong-gon was knocking on opened slightly, just enough to allow one to understand from the inside what was happening in the corridor. A man's face appeared in the doorway, and he asked very distrustfully whether it was really the guys from the rescue team. Dong-gon smiled widely and assured the man that they had come to save him. The man did not smile back but asked for some water as his throat was very dry. Dong-gon opened his bag and began to take out a bottle of water. He handed the bottle to the man, but he didn't even thank him for his help. He took the bottle in his hands. The man asked again if they were really giving him water, and finally began to be convinced that these were indeed rescuers in front of him. Dong-gon replied that they actually lived there. However, it was also true that they had come to save him. He noted that they knew a safer place and invited the man to come with them. The man didn't respond to this and slammed the door. After a short while, rustling sounds were heard and the doors opened again. The man opened them wide and another guy and a girl appeared behind him. The man explained that it was difficult for him to get rid of suspicions and then introduced himself as Hong Jong-sun, extending his hand or shaking hands. Dong-gon accepted the gesture and said his name again, smiling in the most friendly way possible. Dong-gun turned to the girls, Ga-yeon and Hye-rin, and asked them to take the people to the 30th floor and then return back. The girls nodded in agreement. The man, hearing that they were going to the very top, screamed, because he thought that they would be going down to the first floor. The guy behind the man stepped forward, put his hands behind his head, and reassured his father that now it was possible to live, because a helicopter had been sent for them, as he had said. The girl from the squad waved her hand, noting that this was not so. If they went with them, they would be able to eat hot food and take a shower. I heard a hot shower in advance. A girl ran out of the apartment. Apparently, she was willing to go anywhere if there was an opportunity to wash herself. Hye-rin understood her in a purely feminine way and, smiling broadly, assured her that she was definitely not lying and that there was hot water upstairs. The girl ran out of the apartment without a doubt and was ready to go upstairs with the strangers. Seeing that her father remained in place, the girl hurried him because there was no reason for doubt. The man looked at the entire group and said that he knew all the guys who were in the corridor. Thus, after searching the floors, the number of citizens increased to 40. It was decided to first place the children and the elderly in Choi Hyun-jun's apartment. And for all the young people, a place was temporarily allocated in the corridor. After the search, Dong-gun immediately went to Jae-hyun and reported that he had managed to find 40 people in the group. Jae-hyun had expected more and was very surprised. Dong-gun said that they checked all 29 floors, but apparently not all the residents were in the building initially. Jae-hyun praised Dong-gun for the good work he did. Jae-hyun-jun's apartment was almost full, but it should be enough for Jae-hyun's purposes. Without waiting for the time to be alone, Jae-hyun used his absolute eye skill and began scanning the house. He looked around every corner, paying attention to the new citizens. It was also important to him who was doing what and whether everyone was doing the work they were given. But everyone understood the importance of certain tasks and diligently completed the work. Everything fell on the shoulders of Dong-gun's squad, who gladly took on such responsibility for the lives of other residents. After checking where everyone was located and what work was being done right now, Jae-hyun finished scanning. Dong-gun waited for the next task with some trepidation. Jae-hyun suggested moving on to the second stage, hunting goblins, since all the survivors were safe. Dong-gun tried to get the attention of his comrades and asked them to concentrate. He proposed holding a briefing and drawing up a detailed action plan. He noted that their main task was to lure out all the goblins hiding underground. He suggested starting from the first floor and moving on from there. Dong-gun decided that their team should split into 2 teams that would further provoke the creatures and control the territory. After that, they continued the same thing on the second floor. One of the guys approached Dong-gun and asked him to speak out in advance, asking what they would do if there were more goblins than they expected. He assumed that in that case they were simply stuck on the first floor. And on top of that, they might have to drag goblin corpses, and the whole job would be difficult. Hye-rin smiled. I asked Dad not to worry. Let's note that they are looking to deal with everyone alone. Dong-gun smiled at her in response, noted that I can't stop her now with such a number of arrows. The guy asking about the large number of goblins rolled his eyes and was about to say something, but suddenly a loud growl was heard not far away. Everything jumped up and lit up. It wasn't hard to guess who was making those sounds. These were goblins who had managed to get very close almost silently and made their presence known, being ready to attack. They walked straight ahead and weren't careful at all. The growling and stench of the creatures swept through the floor. Hye-rin quickly pulled herself together and, taking out her bow, fired the first arrows, one after another. The girl shot very accurately and 2 goblins immediately fell dead. Others joined in, attacking the monsters with bats and other weapons that Jae-hyun had managed to obtain. The boys showed courage and quickly dealt with the goblins without the slightest tremor in their hands. Very quickly, the first crowd of goblins was defeated and no longer posed a danger to anyone. The guy, having dealt with the last goblin, stopped and looked around, throwing the bat onto his shoulder. One of the guys approached Sunbae and asked in surprise why they all took a bow with them, since he himself insisted on it, and in the meantime he continued to fight with a bat. Sunbae had already forgotten about it. Hye-rin interrupted the boys and shouted for everyone to look at the goblins' bodies. The goblin corpses began to disappear right before our eyes. It felt like they were simply dissolving into thin air. Everyone was amazed by what they saw, and many thought that this might have been another one of Jae-hyun's abilities. Dong-gun turned to the group, and not wanting to waste time, ordered them to go down to the first floor and continue the cleanup. Byung-ho admired Jae-hyun and attributed many of his successes to him, and at that moment, he was sure that everything was going according to Jae-hyun's plan and he had a solution to the problem. Meanwhile, Jae-hyun watched the events unfold and looked at the notifications about the increase in trust of his citizens. He might have wanted to be with them and fight together, but he couldn't leave the apartment, and he had to take on a completely different responsibility. He had to come up with plans that worked and not put anyone in danger. He just happened to watch the first fight with the goblins. It was perfect timing, and even though he hadn't planned it, it turned out that he got to see this small, important victory. The system once again issued a notification about Byung-ho's trust increasing. It had grown so much that he could now be registered as a vassal like Hyun-jun. This surprised the guy very much. Anyway, it all ended well. The more vassals Jae-hyun had, the faster everyone would develop. Jae-hyun looked at Moon Byung-ho's stats and found that he had 88 loyalty points, which was really high. Jae-hyun thought that this was a very good result and smiled. This gave him time to register. Meanwhile, Dong-gon's group had gone down one floor and was already closer to their goal. And as soon as the boys came down, goblins were waiting for them. From the first steps on the -1st floor, they had to get into a fight. Suddenly, Ben-ho began to glow and small electrical discharges began to appear around him, which frightened not only him but everyone else. Most of them screamed, not understanding what was happening and worried about the safety of their comrade. The goblins began to growl and squeak louder, illuminated by the bright light and frightened by the lightning. They were certainly not afraid in vain because the next moment they were thrown in different directions by some enormous force. Most of the goblins retreated back into the darkness, frightened by what was happening. The rest were blinded and remained in their places, completely confused and angry. Dong-gon shouted to his comrades that he had no idea what was going on, but they definitely needed to run away and ordered them to retreat. No one even thought of being indignant, and the whole group started running. Those who had the opportunity continued to shoot back at the goblins that remained behind, reducing the danger. Sooner or later, the creatures would come to their senses and rush after them. That's why the arrows the guys shot rarely missed and mostly reached the monsters' heads. Hye-rin was one of the best marksmen and killed the most monsters, hitting them straight in the head. The girl was able to deftly jump from side to side, causing the creatures to get lost and fall under her arrows. But the death of the goblins angered their relatives even more, who seemed to gain strength from their anger and ran faster, with the desire to tear apart their offenders. In a huge crowd, they rushed to catch up with Dong-gon's group, jumping over their fallen relatives. Ben-ho shouted at Dong-gon and noted that there were too many goblins, to which Dong-gon shouted that he never imagined that they would attract such a crowd of freaks. The young man assumed that the goblins had begun to rise from the -2nd floor, where there were apparently still a lot of them. Trying to figure out where it would be safest, the group moved towards the fire escape. Everyone tried to stick together, and each member of the squad was waited for by the others, even if it was very dangerous. As soon as the last person ran up the stairs, Dong-gon slammed the doors shut, but there were so many goblins that the doors would not close under their onslaught. Their ugly paws broke through the gap between the door and the wall, preventing the passage from being barricaded. The rest, seeing this, ran to help, to hold the doors and prevent the monsters from breaking through. The goblins did not stop or retreat, continuing to try to break through the doors. The boys threw all their weight against the doors, but the creatures were too heavy to hold off. One of the boys shouted at the others to throw the doors and go up the stairs. A scream was heard from behind. It was Hyun-jun who ordered everyone to move aside. He had the strength of a gorilla, and now this ability was very useful. His muscles bulged to enormous proportions. He was filled with strength and could cope with anything, it seemed. He ran to the doors from which the guys immediately promised, seeing him, and slammed the doors, not allowing the goblins to get to the stairs. The boys didn't leave, worried about Hyun-jun. Everyone was waiting for him, but he shouted at the boys to go upstairs as quickly as possible. He decided to stay and let the others escape. His strength was still enough to hold back the onslaught of monsters and hold the doors. It was very difficult, but he still held the doors, which greatly surprised him. He told himself that he had to deal with this at all costs and that only he could do it. Dong-gun shouted from above to Uncle Jun that everyone was safe and asked him to throw the doors and quickly go up after them. Hearing this, Hyun-jun let go of the doors and shouted that he would run. He had very little time. The goblins could break through the doors at any moment. But in the worst-case scenario, Hyun-jun twisted his ankle before he could even climb one step up the stairs. Hyun-jun fell to the floor, and at the same moment, the goblins burst through the doors. Dong-gun screamed and was ready to rush to Hyun-jun's aid, but he refused and ordered the boys to leave without him. Dong-gun remained in place, but the others rushed down without thinking. The young man with the bat began to fight off the goblins, protecting Hyun-jun and not allowing the monsters to harm him. He gave the man his hand, hoping that he could save him. He risked his own life to save this man. Hyun-jun tried to crawl away from the goblins and grabbed the hand of the guy who ran to his aid. The paws of monsters were reaching out behind him, trying to drag him towards them. And the next moment, the young man discovered that Hyunjun was no longer in front of him. This is what shocked him. It seemed like the man had simply vanished, since the guy didn't see the goblins drag him back. But the goblins just became even more numerous. The monsters began to pour out onto the stairwell one after another, while the young man tried to call his uncle. The young man was distracted for only a short time, which was enough time for one of the goblins to jump on him. Just a little bit more, and the monster would have definitely grabbed him. But thanks to the rest of the group, this did not happen, and the monster fell down with an arrow in its head. Donggun called out to Duke-su and asked him to quickly go up the stairs to the others. The young man realized that his uncle could not be saved, and obeying, ran up the stairs. Kang Dok-su ran as fast as he could, and the others hurried him along while trying to protect him from the goblins. Everyone gathered together and shot at the goblins that were following their comrade on his heels. They could grab him at any moment. Even He-rin, who was a master of the bow, couldn't shoot all the goblins, as there were too many of them. On top of that, the number of goblins was increasing every second, and the chances of salvation were rapidly decreasing. It was already deep into the night. Donggun's squad was still trying to figure out the problem they had gotten themselves into. But they had not yet met that very monster, which was worth fearing much more than ordinary goblins. This monster was hungry to kill. It was short of blood and it craved more. He was no longer interested in anything except killing. Its eyes were glowing and its mouth was dripping with saliva. It growled and spoke of its thirst. It walked through the streets in search of prey, and even short runs were very dangerous. No one could guess or track down where they would meet this monster next time. This monster has a thirst to kill people at any cost. Hyunjun still survived. It was one of Jae-hyun's opportunities, who managed to save the man and carry him upstairs. Hyunjun fell to the floor, appearing from some portal in the air, and found himself in front of Jae-hyun, who immediately noted that something bad had almost happened. Hyunjun was ready to die. Rather, he thought he was already dead until he saw his neighbor in front of him. Jae-hyun offered his hand to the blue one to help him get to his feet. Jae-hyun decided to observe the situation with his absolute eyes just in case. You were glad that he had the skill to summon a vassal. Hyunjun didn't look well at all. His clothes were torn and there were wounds on his arms and legs from the goblin's claws. The man was very scared and did not understand how he ended up on the 30th floor. Jae-hyun tried to calm him down and asked if he was okay. Hyunjun looked at himself, and seeing the wound on his leg, he noted that such a scratch should heal quickly, although it looked very bad. Jae-hyun looked at her vassal's leg in fear and thought to herself that he should have bought more medicine. He asked Hyunjun to wait a little and stay put, and went into another room. Jae-hyun went to the first aid kit, although Hyunjun tried to object and refused help. Jae-hyun understood that in situations like this, medication would be necessary. This situation brought back memories of his childhood, when his mother treated him, and he was unhappy about it. Jae-hyun looked through the entire first aid kit and checked the availability of medications. There were only 40 slots and we had to order more medicines to have in stock. He began to think about what needed to be done to make everything correct and effective. Afterwards, he opened the first aid kit again and took out the necessary medications that would help Hyunjun. After that, he decided to make up for the shortfall and paid almost 80,000 won to replenish his supplies of medicine. Jae-hyun took the first aid kit and went to Hyunjun Iwoo to give him the necessary help and heal his wounds. The young man sat down next to him and asked to let him examine the wounds on his leg. Hyunjun pulled his pants up above his knee and exposed his leg. The wound was serious and could hardly be called a mere scratch, although Hyunjun insisted that he was fine. Jae-hyun ignored this speech and warned that he would first disinfect the wound and take the necessary medication and tweezers with cotton wool. He tried to do everything very carefully so as not to cause unnecessary discomfort and pain to Hyunjun. But as soon as he touched the guy with cotton wool, Hyunjun screamed and grimaced in pain. But along with his cries, the system gave a notification about the increase in trust. The man was very grateful for the help and told the young man about it. Jae-hyun really hoped that everyone else was okay and that no one was seriously injured or even killed. After finishing treating the wound, Jae-hyun invited Hyunjun to rest for a while in his apartment and explained that he had some business to attend to. Jae-hyun wanted to check out the underground floors and make sure the group was okay. He used his absolute eye skill again to scan the house. He began to look through the lower floors and very quickly found Donggun's team. Jae-hyun managed to see the chaos going on down there and that things weren't going well for the group. They ran very fast trying to get away from the goblins and tried to shoot back without stopping for long. The girl's skills were very helpful. She had saved the lives of others more than once thanks to her excellent shooting. The rest also tried very hard not to miss the goblins with their bows and supported each other as best they could. Doksu was still acting as bait as the goblins were still chasing him. Despite the shooting of the others and the hits, the young man was unable to break away to a more or less safe distance from the monsters. The young man tried to run as fast as he could to avoid falling into the clutches of the monsters behind him. Goblins were everywhere. They jumped off the stairs, walls, and nothing could stop them. When several goblins jumped down from the stairs, which was very abrupt, Ben-Ho shouted loudly to warn his comrade of the high danger. He immediately rushed to help and tried to fight off the monsters and clear the way for Doksu. Having fought off several monsters, Ben-Ho ran towards Doksu. Dong-gun was very worried and did not want to let the young man go, but he could not do anything. The rest could only watch as Ben-Ho found himself in the midst of the goblins and tried to deal with them. It was unlikely that the young man would have been able to kill all the monsters on his own. No one believed in it, because he had never shown himself to be good enough in battle. But that was a mistaken opinion about him. He swung the bat and the goblins scattered across the floor without any signs of life. The guys were pleasantly surprised because none of their team could have imagined that Ben-Ho was capable of such a thing. Jae-hyun watched this dragon and concluded that the guys were doing well, and this calmed him down a little. But Jae-hyun still decided to intervene and help somehow. Opening the characteristics, he found that the teleportation function was available and was glad that he had registered Byung-ho as a vassal. The goblins continued to attack the group. Everyone's strength was waning, but the battle promised to be very long and difficult. One of the guys approached Gon and asked if he had figured out the extension cord, and he confirmed that he had finished everything. He then asked Hyrin and another guy if they had finished working on the water tank, and they also confirmed that everything was ready. He then called Ben-Ho and asked him to run to his place, remaining behind to watch the goblins to cover their retreat. Ben-Ho jumped over the barricade of all sorts of objects and found himself in relative safety. Altogether, the guys ran even further, and for a few seconds everything around became quiet. But the silence was short-lived, and very soon a huge barrel appeared from behind the barricade. The guys tilted the barrel and opened the taps and dropped it down. The water poured down with a strong pressure onto the floor and began to knock the goblins off their feet. The monsters could not expect this and were confused. They began to fuss and grumble, but did not know where to go or how to escape. After waiting for the right moment, Dong-gun gave the command to his comrade. Hearing the command, he pressed the button on the extension cord. The exposed wires were lowered down, where there was now water all around. The wires shorted out and sparks started to appear all around. The monsters that fell into this trap had no chance of survival. They immediately began to convulse from the electric shocks. And at that very moment, the system gave a notification to Jae-hyun about receiving experience and a reward of more than 300,000 won, which were immediately credited to the wallet. At this moment, Jae-hyun was just watching this with his absolute eyes. He saw this discharge, heard the screams of the monsters, but it was not a pleasant sight. Because of this, Jae-hyun couldn't stop the scanning and teleportation. The portal began to expand to immense proportions, and it was impossible to say exactly how it would end. But the goblins were dying, and that was definitely good news. The system issued a notification that enemy creatures had been detected and activated the destruction function. Everything began to sparkle even more, and the room filled with clouds of smoke. Those goblins who did not manage to get into the water survived and were perplexed when their enemies disappeared right in front of their noses. These creatures could not understand where their dead relatives and those who killed them had gone. They chased them for a long time in order to deal with them, but the prey simply disappeared, as if it had never existed. The one who disliked this most was the monster who resembled a large dog or a bear, which the goblins were also afraid of. The monster appeared from the darkness and announced its presence with a loud roar. Without thinking twice, the monster attacked the stupid goblins, who were completely confused. The rest did not run away, but simply stayed and watched the massacre of their comrade and quietly grumbled from fear and misunderstanding. Having dealt with the goblin, the monster moved towards the rest of the crowd, its bright red eyes glittering in the darkness and inspiring fear. The rest of the goblins suffered the same fate. The monster was thirsty for death, and it did not matter who died from its paws and fangs. The monster killed the goblins one by one, and the rest just watched. It was a real bloody mess, and chaos reigned. There was no escaping or dodging this beast. Some of the goblins began to realize what was happening, but they had little chance of resisting their enemy, even given their numbers. They wanted to attack back and avenge their brothers, but they could not bring themselves to do so. They waved their arms and growled loudly, baring their teeth, but remained in their places. The monster did not stop and continued to reduce the number of goblins, not wanting to leave even one alive. But still, One of the goblins, more boldly than all, attacked the monster and sank his fangs into its body. Others joined in, following his example, and began to tear the monster to shreds. The bear began to growl loudly and try to shake the little freaks off himself, but others jumped in their place. Very soon he no longer had the strength to fight, and the goblins began to attack him more and more. The monster didn't have long left, but for the people it was only to their advantage, because the number of goblins was reduced and such a dangerous enemy as that bear was exposed. The monster occasionally tried to fight and escape from the clutches of the goblins, but very quickly gave up, allowing his life to be taken away. But suddenly everything went quiet. The goblins disappeared, and the bear stopped screaming in pain and began to rise. The system issued a notification about granting citizenship, and the monster stretched out high on its hind legs, after which the bear spread its front paws to the sides and began to stretch out even more. After another moment, this terrible monster began to turn into a man. The bear, who recently caused a bloody mess and brought death to all living things, changed and turned into a girl. The girl immediately fell to the floor, exhausted and probably wounded. Jae-hyun watched this and was in great shock from the metamorphosis that had taken place. He covered his eyes with his hand and grabbed his shirt tightly, trying to come to his senses. He looked at the girl who was doing this among the goblin corpses and couldn't comprehend what he saw. It was not clear who this girl was and how she turned into a bear so cruel and big. Jae-hyun immediately found and opened her characteristics. Her name was Oh An-ju. Her trust was low, but she had the ability and was a werewolf bear, and her physical abilities and regeneration were at their maximum. The girl was level 33 and also had an A-rank ability, which surprised Jae-hyun even more. But by this time, Jae-hyun saw that Yoo Hye-rin and Ha Dong-gun's trust had increased to 50 points and loyalty had been unlocked, and Duk-soo's loyalty was already at 30 points, which was good news. Jae-hyun immediately began registering Kang Duk-soo as a vassal. After becoming a vassal, Deok-soo gained access to the Steel Knight ability, which summoned steel armor that protected his entire body and halberd. The level depended on the awakened ability, and Jae-hyun began to think about these parameters. Choi Hyun-jun's ability with rank was level 20. Kang Dok-soo had an ability of rank 25. Moon Byung-ho had a level 30 rank teleportation ability. At the time Jae-hyun registered them as a vassal, their level was determined based on their awakened ability. Jae-hyun began to think that perhaps the rank was given out randomly. If this was true, it would change a lot in his plans and strategies. If Moon Byung-ho received rank A due to his loyalty, then Hyun-jun with a higher loyalty score should have received rank B instead of C. In fact, Kang Dok-soo with a loyalty indicator of 31 received the ability of rank. Jae-hyun thought that he should find out under what conditions people received high-ranking abilities because a lot depended on it. This was an extremely important task, and it had to be solved as quickly as possible. He had to register only a dozen vassals, and it was more profitable for him to get people with a higher rank. The problem was that he still didn't know what exactly would happen if he accepted as a vassal a person with an already awakened ability. The only thing is that people with the awakened ability could move freely along stairs, elevators, and corridors. Jae-hyun could only scan his surroundings, and he didn't dare to go beyond his floor. He walked to the elevator and decided to use his absolute eyes skill again. It was important for him to control everything that happened in his house, and with the appearance of a stranger with such abilities, it was worth checking everything even more carefully. The girl was still lying unconscious on the -1st floor. Jae-hyun waited for the elevator to arrive. After waiting a little, the young man turned and addressed Hyun-jun. He looked quite scared but was ready for whatever he was asked to do. The elevator arrived very quickly and the doors began to open. Jae-hyun exhaled and said that he wanted to ask Hyun-jun to bring the woman from the -2nd floor to them. Meanwhile, Dong-gun's group dealt with the aftermath of the electrical shock below. They dismantled the wires and examined the burnt goblins. Several of the goblin bodies particularly interested the boys. The monsters just suddenly exploded and it was obvious that someone had worked on it. Dong-gun became wary, immediately thinking that someone might have had an ability that made this happen. He understood that this man was very important for their company, very dangerous if he was not friendly. This made the young man think seriously. He hoped that this man who was capable of such a thing was willing to join them. After talking with Jae-hyun, Hyun-jun went to the people he and his group found in the house, and while telling them that they had all the benefits of civilization, he did not forget to point out that Jae-hyun was an outstanding person. He smiled and said that they had hot water on their floor, knowing the reaction this would cause among the newcomers. And when the reaction followed, he again noted that this was also part of Jae-hyun's abilities. At dinner, Hye-won again began to say that the food on the table was only because of the ingredients that Jae-hyun gave, Otherwise, she would have only offered tangerines and rice. Jae-hyun continued to watch the guys below. Dong-gun continued to look around the room and ponder the abilities of the man who dealt with the goblins single-handedly. He also thought about Ben-ho, who was nearby and helped collect the wires and put everything in order. He was a very quiet and reserved guy, but eventually showed a very high skill in fighting monsters, which no one expected from him. It was noticeable that after meeting Kim Jae-hyun, Ben-ho became a completely different person. Such changes even scared Dong-gun because it was not clear what other means he possessed. Hyun-jun, having given the newcomers a tour, immediately went to carry out his task. His changes could also surprise everyone because he previously did not have much courage, much less strength. But there was only one conclusion. In a cursed world, only one thing was needed to survive. Many like Hyun-jun could change greatly and gain that very thing that was important for survival. Jae-hyun watched Hyun-jun's every step as he made his way to the girl in the basement. Dong-gun believed that in order to survive, he had to become Jae-hyun's chosen one at all costs, and then the chances were very high. The child was playing with a car in the yard, like all ordinary children of his age. It was calm around, and there was no need to worry about any dangers. The boy smiled, rolling the car along the ground and making the sound of its engine in a childish way, and looked at his mother, who was standing nearby. It was a young girl. She also smiled back at her son and watched his games with great joy. But suddenly, everything around went dark. The boy continued to laugh, not even suspecting the danger that surrounded him. His mother's face changed immediately. The girl stood in complete horror as if fear had paralyzed her. Cold sweat appeared on his face, and his face was distorted with fear and confusion. Behind her happy son stood several monsters, who were about to grab him and tear him to pieces. The woman jumped up and ran to save her child. She was mad with fear and didn't really understand what was going on around her. Soon the boy turned around and saw with his own eyes the terrible monsters that stood right behind him and were already stretching out their paws towards him. The girl was insulting me with all her might, but she understood that I wouldn't be able to save my son, since she was too far away. She screamed loudly, but it was too late. The bloody car her child was playing with fell to the floor. It was a dream. The girl shuddered and woke up in bed. On her face was the same horror that she had experienced in the dream. Jae-hyun was standing next to her. He asked if her name was Oh-on-ju. The girl looked at him sideways, trying to figure out where she was. For a while, Jae-hyun and On-ju looked at each other in silence. The girl did not dare to answer. On-ju carefully sat up on the bed and grabbed her head, hiding in her hair. Jae-hyun decided to break the silence and expressed that it was nice to meet you, and after stating his name, he extended his hand for a handshake. The girl glanced sideways at his hand again and asked Jae-hyun if he had done it. Jae-hyun didn't immediately understand what On-ju meant and looked at her questioningly. The girl said that she was talking about seeing goblins whose heads were torn off. Jae-hyun, realizing that there would be no handshake, clenched his fingers a little and decided to remove his hand. He rubbed the hand he was holding out to the girl a little and confirmed that it was his doing. The girl looked at him with some anger and resentment, although it seemed there was no basis for this. She thought that Jae-hyun had such a strong ability that he could tear off the heads of so many goblins in an instant. But she also understood that this might not be entirely true. She felt uncomfortable and curled up on the bed. There were so many thoughts in her head at that moment that she needed to collect them all. She held onto her hands so tightly that her veins began to swell from the strain. But nevertheless, she assumed that this young man could help her. I was able to cope with so many goblins. The girl said that she had a son, which Jae-hyun never expected to hear. On-ju asked to save him without saying another word. That was the only thing that bothered her and was important. She started saying that she needed it at least for one day. She started shaking. You could tell that she was about to have a fit. The system gave a notification that Oh-on-ju's trust had increased greatly. The girl began to cry and say how much she missed her son. Jae-hyun stood there speechless as he saw the girl crying in pain, realizing that she had lost her child to the goblins. The girl wouldn't calm down. I stopped hysterically only more, although she tried with all her might to bring herself to order. Jae-hyun looked at her without asking himself if there was no way out of her situation and didn't understand how he could help her. He opened the window and assigned the girl a task to catch 1,000 goblins with no time limit and no punishment. As a reward, he designated the resurrection of her son. He knew it sounded very strange, but he was capable of a lot. He hoped that he could do this too, but when Jae-hyun pressed the confirmation button, the system displayed a notification that such a task could not be given. He understood that there was no chance of success in such a task. Jae-hyun understood that he had no way to revive a person even if he really wanted to. But then another notification popped up, saying that there wasn't enough money to set such a task, which really shocked the guy. The system did not allow such a task only because it was very expensive, and there were no such funds in the account. This really struck the young man. It meant that he could still resurrect a person from the dead, and for this he only needed money. He looked around the room, trying to catch his eye on something that would help him come up with a plan. But for now, it was difficult for him to even imagine how much money would be needed to resurrect this girl's son. However, after thinking about it, an idea nevertheless came to his mind, and he addressed the girl by name, attracting her attention. The girl stopped crying for a moment and looked at Jae-hyun. Jae-hyun collected his thoughts and replied that it seemed like he could help her. He explained that there might be a way to revive her son. The girl immediately stopped crying and looked at the young man as if he were a god. He understood that it would be enough for her to just have the hope that it was possible. Anju's voice trembled, but she gathered her strength and asked again if it was true. There was indeed hope in her voice. Jae-hyun confirmed his words. Well, he explained that, however, right now it would not be possible to do this, which greatly upset the girl. Not wanting Anju to fall into hysterics again, Jae-hyun emphasized that there was a way, but a lot would have to be done to achieve it. The girl almost screamed that she agreed to everything and asked what should be done for this. Jae-hyun thought that Ha-dong-gun's squad now included Kang Duk-soo and Moon Byung-ho with awakened abilities. If they added Oh Anju, who was level 33, it would be much easier for them to deal with most of the monsters. Hae-hyun thought that the best solution would be to make all 7 of them vassals. After thinking about it quickly, Jae-hyun glanced at the girl and smiled and replied that he shouldn't have gotten up at first because he wanted to introduce her to some people. The others received the girl very friendly. Ha-dong-gun was very happy that there would be another person on his team, even though he didn't know about her abilities yet. The girl immediately asked Dong-gun if he was fighting goblins by throwing baseballs at them, which really surprised him. Anju glanced towards Hi-rim and noted that she was an archer, which shocked the team even more. Hi-rim couldn't resist and asked if the girl knew them all. Anju smiled and asked if they didn't remember her, their old friend, and growled slightly like a bear. The boys looked at the girl and did not immediately understand what exactly she meant, because they considered that bear an evil monster and could not connect it with her. Anju's face immediately became covered in clumps of fur. Following the face, the rest of the body began to become covered with fur. Soon the girl's face also began to change and take the shape of a bear's muzzle and become even more covered with fur. Hi-rim was not shy about showing her emotions, and having turned back, began to point her finger with great fear towards the girl. In an instant, instead of a graceful girl, a huge bear with thick fur and large sharp fangs appeared in front of them. Hi-rim started screaming that it was the same beast and kept pointing her fingers at it. Hee-ju threw the bag and emphasized that rather she was a bear, they were just a beast. The girl noted that she helped their team several times. I was very surprised that they didn't know about it. Well, when the girl said this, the guys quickly understood what moment she was talking about specifically. Hee-ju emphasized that their meeting was not accidental. Well, the enemies and the goblins were her friends, and she was very happy to meet the team in person. At that moment, Jae-hyun entered the room and said that he was very glad that everyone had already met each other. Jae-hyun addressed everyone and noted that he had something very important to say. He said that an operation to save Moon Byung-ho's grandmother would be carried out the next morning. He explained that the number of goblins had decreased and so they could use this to save the old lady. The team looked at the young man silently and did not say a word. Afterwards, Jae-hyun added that on top of everything, Choi Hyun-jun will miss this surgery due to his injury. Jae-hyun explained that it was because of Hyun-jun's injury that Oh Anju, who was very happy to work together, would be taking part in the surgery. Having calmed down that everyone had been warned and the she-bear had nothing against it, he said goodbye to the boys and promised to see them in the morning. The boys listened to him and agreed. On the one hand, they were even very glad that the time to save Grandma had finally come, because Ben-ho was very worried about it. But Jae-hyun didn't leave right away after that and turned to Ben-ho and Duk-soo, which greatly alarmed them. Jae-hyun asked the boys to go out into the hallway with him for a while to discuss some details. The boys immediately followed him. It was already very dark outside and the full moon was shining through the window. Jae-hyun asked the guys if they knew why he called them both. It was clear from the guys' faces that they had no idea why they were the ones in the hallway. They couldn't even imagine that the conversation would be about the resurrection of their new friend's son. Dok-soo replied that she couldn't imagine and didn't understand at all why it was needed. Ben-ho began to guess and asked if it was somehow connected with their power. Jae-hyun smiled and confirmed that it was precisely because of their strength. Jae-hyun explained that this time it was the two of them who woke up, which again surprised the guys. Jae-hyun continued and explained that Byung-ho had gained the ability to teleport. Then he turned to Dok-soo and noted that he had received an ability called the Steel Knight. Jae-hyun decided to have this conversation in order to find out what these guys are capable of before tomorrow's operation. First, he looked through the characteristics again and then gave the task to demonstrate the awakened abilities. Before confirming the tasks, Jae-hyun thought again whether it was really worth giving the guys a paired task, but I still decided to continue everything in this way. Duk-soo was surprised and turned to Jae-hyun and clarified that he said that he woke up just like Dong-gun and received confirmation of his words. Dok-soo didn't understand if it was good and asked what exactly the Steel Knight's ability was, and Jae-hyun explained that he could summon steel armor and a halberd. Dok-soo was even more amazed. On the one hand, it seemed that this superpower was not as cool as the others, but he had no idea what it was about. Well, in order not to think for long, he decided to immediately try this ability and began to try to summon armor. Well, for a while, absolutely nothing happened, and he looked at Jae-hyun, who was standing opposite, in bewilderment. Ben-ho also decided to try his ability and tried to teleport to another place. He succeeded immediately and found himself in another place in the corridor and was very happy about it. He was delighted with his superpower, because with it he could do incredible things, especially in battle. Ben-ho's trust and loyalty immediately increased, and he ran up to Jae-hyun, bowed and sincerely thanked him for his skills. Jae-hyun didn't know how to react and asked the young man not to thank him, which confused him a little. Jae-hyun explained that the boy couldn't go to his grandmother right now, and he asked why that was impossible. Jae-hyun emphasized that there is no guarantee that he will be able to handle his abilities and not harm himself or anyone else. Looking at Ben-ho again, Jae-hyun noted that perhaps he was just lucky now, and everything happened quickly and easily. Jae-hyun said that he thought it would be better to find out for now what the maximum distance he could move was and what the penalty would be for using his ability. Ben-ho agreed with him, although he was very upset about it. At that moment, they heard a noise behind them, and both of them turned to look at Duk-soo, who was still trying to summon his armor. He succeeded. In front of the guys stood Dok-soo with a huge, sharp axe, fully dressed in good armor that covered his body completely. Deok-soo was extremely shocked by his new clothes and the fact that he was able to implement them in principle. He tried to understand this, and then he was very happy, because now he understood how useful this ability would be in the fight with monsters. His trust and loyalty also increased. Jae-hyun, happy for him, turned to Ben-ho again. After the guy was in attention, Jae-hyun pointed her finger at the house across the street and asked if he could try teleporting there. Ben-ho moved closer to the window and concentrated. It was clear that he was not at all sure whether it would work out, but he promised to try. Dok-soo approached Ben-ho and tried to encourage him, assuring him that he could do it. Ben-ho concentrated as much as possible and tried to move to where Jae-hyun asked him to. A few seconds later, the guy disappeared, leaving behind only a faint blue glow. And a few seconds later, the young man appeared in the house opposite. He looked back and saw who had actually succeeded in teleporting. The guys were waving at him from the window of the house he had just been in. He waved back, pleased with his success and the fact that he had moved completely and remained unharmed, and also had not teleported past. Jae-hyun was also very happy that Byung-ho did everything perfectly, and he breathed a sigh of relief. Ben-ho continued to stand by the window and look at the boys, not yet daring to go back the same way. Well, suddenly the young man began to lose consciousness and began to slide to the floor. Dok-soo and Jae-hyun were very scared for him, but they couldn't help him from where they were. Jae-hyun later decided to use the ability to summon a vassal. I hope it works and Ben-ho can be brought back. Luckily, the teleportation worked and Ben-ho found himself unconscious on the floor in front of the guys. He did not come to for a long time and was carried into the apartment and put to bed. Jae-hyun, I'm waiting for the young man to regain consciousness. I thought that this happened because apparently the movement required too much endurance, which he lacked. Duk-soo asked if his comrade would be okay, to which Jae-hyun assured him that he would be fine if he got enough rest and explained that he probably passed out because he was not yet used to his abilities. Duk-soo was happy about this news and said that in this case, he could breathe a sigh of relief. Jae-hyun smiled back and then asked him if he was doing any sports. This question was not asked without reason. Jae-hyun set a task for Duk-soo to do push-ups and sit-ups 100 times, and he had to do it while wearing his armor. This task was difficult for an unprepared person to complete, and Duk-soo was wearing very heavy armor, so it was difficult for him to do it. He was all red and sweat was pouring down his face, but he continued. He had few options but to refuse this strange task that had him sweating profusely. Well, in the end, the guy managed to complete the task, which was counted by the system. Jae-hyun was surprised. Well, he understood that since Do-Kei-Soo was a student of the physical education department, he must have incredible endurance, and it was worth checking. Jae-hyun stared at the screen again and watched as the system calculated some kind of score. He didn't know what score the system would show and was a little wary. His thoughts were interrupted by Dak-soo, who asked if it was possible to end the test at this point. Jae-hyun smiled and praised the work, allowed the guy to rest, and then thanked him for his help. Dak-soo was very tired of the armor but was pleased with his results. Finally, the system processing finished, and it gave a notification that Jae-hyun's powers had been increased, which surprised him greatly. He stretched his arms and really felt a surge of strength and energy. But it was quite strange and needed to be sorted out. But still, for Jae-hyun, this couldn't be bad news, and he smiled happily. These changes changed the situation. The next day, as agreed, Donggun's group set out on an operation to rescue the grandmother. Somewhere in the alleys of Busan, the squad once again encountered a huge crowd of goblins from whom they had to run away. In such moments, Dak-soo's endurance came in very handy and helped him survive. Goblins were generally very fast monsters, moving at the speed of humans. In that situation, not only did Dak-soo's stamina come in handy, but he also used his new ability to summon armor to give his friends the opportunity to run away. The monsters couldn't penetrate the armor, which gave Dak-soo a great advantage in battle. It was not as dangerous for him as for others to be near the monsters, and he had the opportunity to fight them longer. Now the fangs and claws of these monsters did not frighten him so much, because he was well protected. With extraordinary cheerfulness, the girl threw her enemies to the sides, giving her friends a little time to catch their breath. The guy managed to deal with a large number of monsters, which brought the success of the entire team closer and increased the income of experience and money. Dak-soo, as soon as the opportunity arose, helped the others. Ben-ho shouted and asked not to worry about those who are lagging behind. Take out your bow. Dak-soo laughed and returned to fighting the goblins. Now I know that they are covering for him. The goblins had not even thought of retreating before this, and attacked the guys with more fury, screaming and growling in their own language. But seeing that Dak-soo was no longer alone, they turned around and ran away, accompanied by the shouts of the guys wishing him never to come back. The bravest of the goblins remained, wishing to continue the battle, but this desire quickly left them. The boys were joined by Anju in the form of a she-bear who could tear goblins into small pieces without much effort. The goblins could no longer retreat, but fighting with such a beast was also very dangerous for them. Dak-soo and Ben-ho continued to finish off those who did not manage to escape, and the bear dealt with the bravest of the creatures. This was a great team that had to be avoided if you wanted to survive. Dak-soo shouted at Ben-ho and gave him the command to do what he had agreed to do. There was no more time, and it was necessary to act as quickly as possible. Ben-ho should have run to his grandmother and saved her while the others dealt with the goblins and distracted them. Ben-ho jumped up and ran, managing to thank the team. Jae-hyun sat and waited for some results. The system gave a notification that Anju had completed the task and the rewards were counted. 130,000 won was credited to the account. But Jae-hyun did not expect the account to be replenished because she thought that he had set a slightly different task. In Kang Duk-soo's case, it was an increase in strength. Based on this, he thought that in the future, rewards would be random. He suggested that perhaps with increasing difficulty of the tasks, the rewards would be greater. Then a notification appeared that Byung-ho had also completed his task and the rewards were counted again. Jae-hyun stared at the screen with curiosity. A notification appeared at school that Jae-hyun had won the jackpot. Winning the jackpot surprised Jae-hyun a lot. He had done many things for a long time, but not this. The guy didn't even think that this was possible. In addition to the jackpot, skill points were also added as a reward, which was also surprising to Jae-hyun. Meanwhile, Ben-ho was rushing to his grandmother and decided to use teleportation right on the way. Luckily for him, his ability did not fail him, and in a few seconds he found himself where he needed to be. In front of him was the courtyard where his grandmother lived. This moment was very exciting because he might not make it in time. He walked up to the front door and opened it slightly, listening. But his emotions got the better of him, and he ran down the hallway trying to find his grandmother and very worried that he wouldn't find her at home. He began to shout and call her, hoping that she would respond. When he ran into the room, he froze on the threshold, afraid to take another step. His grandmother was lying in her bed. At first it seemed that she was simply sleeping. He ran up to her and began to try to wake her up, continuing to call out so that she would respond to his voice and wake up. Grandma began to mumble something barely audible, but she was alive, which was what Ben-ho was most worried about. The young man squeezed her hand but was still very worried. The grandmother recognized his voice, but did not believe her ears that it was really her grandson. Ben-ho couldn't help but cry with joy. He cried out softly, letting out tears, but they were tears of joy. He jumped onto the bed and hugged the old woman tightly, glad that she was okay. He cried and began to ask for forgiveness for the fact that it took him so long to get to her. He silently thanked Jae-hyun, who was able to help him and give him back the opportunity to hug someone close to him. Jae-hyun saw a system notification that Byung-ho's loyalty had increased to 100 points, and the number of Jae-hyun's vassals had also increased. Now Jae-hyun could register 11 people as vassals, which was good news. He immediately became interested in whether he could level up. He chose Ben-ho and decided to see how much it would cost to level him up. The system gave an error and asked to top up the account. Upgrading Ben-ho cost 100 million won. It was very expensive. He mentally apologized to the guy and thought that now he would have to give everyone tasks every day in order to save up such a sum. His thoughts were interrupted by some sound. It sounded like an elevator arriving. Jae-hyun was wary because he wasn't expecting anyone to visit. He immediately used his absolute eye ability to find out in advance who to meet. He scanned the corridor and saw that there was a guy and a girl standing in it. The guy had some kind of box on his shoulder. Overall, they look preoccupied with something and are unlikely to have come just to say hello. Haiwan was the first to greet them. They went into her apartment and started asking if anyone was home. The girl came out and was surprised to see new faces at her guests. The girl smiled and introduced herself as Kim Da-bin. She called the guy her younger brother named Kim Min-ho. Da-bin explained that they lived in apartment 1701. Hyeon became wary and asked why they came. The girl smiled again and explained that they came because they had a request for her. Hyeon became even more wary because basically all the requests of the residents were carried out by Jae-hyun. And if these people came with bad intentions, she could not defend herself. Da-bin emphasized that her request might sound impudent, and at that moment, her face changed to a less friendly one, as it seemed to Hyeon, who was overly excited. The girl asked to take a shower at Hyeon's house once. Hyeon herself expected the worst, and when she heard the request, she was confused. Hyeon asked again if they only needed this, and the girl confirmed that they just wanted to wash themselves. Hyeon breathed a sigh of relief and invited the boy and girl to come in, and they thanked her and stepped over the threshold. The guy asked where he could put his box, to which Hyeon first asked what was in it. The guy put the box on the floor, and the sister explained that they had brought all sorts of canned goods as a gift. Minho opened the box, which indeed turned out to be a variety of canned goods with vegetables, fish, and meat. Hyeon was embarrassed and noted that it was not necessary at all and they could wash for free. But Da-bin reassured her, "We note that it was impossible without gifts when you show up at someone else's house with strange requests." The girl's gaze caught on something and the smile disappeared from her face. In the corner of the room, she saw folded bows and arrows and fell silent for a moment. Da-bin asked Hyeon if these bows belonged to the residents of the house. Hyeon was taken aback by this question, finding it even stranger than the appearance of these people on her doorstep. The girl said that these were things that did not belong to the residents of the house. These people used to live in other areas. But then she emphasized that it took a long time to explain everything and smiled. The girl chuckled. There was some tension and awkwardness between them. Jae-hyun watched their conversation the whole time and noted to himself that they didn't look like bad people. He decided that he would need to somehow get out and see them and also have a little chat. Looking out the window, he thought that they might also try to save people from another high-rise building, and it was worth establishing contact with everyone who was in his house. At that moment, the base system issued a notification about the capture of a red tiger and counted almost 40 million won in the wallet. This made Jae-hyun tense. He realized what was happening and became angry and very agitated. Dong-gon's team encountered more than just goblins while they waited for Ben-ho. The battle was over, but it didn't end as well as we would have liked. In front of the group lay a large red tiger, and next to it was Onju, still in the form of a bear. Jae-hyun couldn't understand what could have happened there, because he was busy with Hyeon's guests and missed everything. This angered him, because he could not allow any losses, and the red tiger was a rather unexpected and dangerous opponent. But the red tiger was not just any animal. It was another human with the unusual ability to transform, as confirmed by the notification for citizenship for the new resident. It also meant that there were still people left in the city. Jae-hyun issued citizenship to establish contact and look at the stranger's characteristics. Citizenship to several more people, after which a notification appeared stating that when the number of citizens reached a certain number, the skill of the power of trust became available. Jae-hyun was curious about the skill, but he was more concerned about whether there were any wounded. Meanwhile, Byung-ho was carrying his grandmother to the group. Dong-gun's group had already left the previous location. Duk-soo was carrying On-ju, who was unconscious but had already turned back into a human. On-ju was still injured, which made Jae-hyun very upset and even more angry. He could do nothing to help his people, who, on top of everything else, once again encountered goblins on their way. Two of them, Ben-ho and Dak-soo, were carrying people and could not participate in the fight and were very vulnerable. But the people they picked up tried to shoot back with the bows they were given and were themselves surprised that their arrows hit the target. No one stopped even when they saw the goblins. Hyerin noted that her body had become unusually light, and Dong-gun agreed, emphasizing that he was not at all out of breath. It was the effect of the trust power skill, which increased all abilities by a percentage that was equal to the trust of each individual. Almost everyone in Dong-gun's squad had a 50th level of trust and above. Endurance, vision, muscle strength, reactions, and so on were among their abilities. If all their abilities increased by 50%, it was obvious that their combat skills had increased. Byung-ho noted that the changes in their well-being were most likely influenced by Jae-hyun. At that moment, the loyalty of Ga-yeon and Hyerin increased, and it became possible to register them as vassals, which Jae-hyun immediately did. The girls immediately glowed blue. This scared them a lot, although nothing bad happened to them. The girls lagged a little behind the main group, rode around to understand what was happening to them. And because of this, some of the goblins caught up with them. Hyerin immediately shot an arrow at them without thinking too long. The arrow shot from the bow with extraordinary force and killed the goblin. But by some miracle, the arrow passed through him and rushed towards the others. The girl was shocked by this ability. Now she had access to a piercing shot which consumed mental resources to release an arrow that pierced the target. Jae-hyun decided to give her a task right away so as not to waste time. The goal was to kill a certain number of goblins using the piercing shot skill. Jae-hyun found this ability to be quite controversial. Another girl had access to the ability of poisonous fog, which consumed mental resources to release fogs of deadly poison. The ability was not bad, but it was only B rank, and if used incorrectly, it could harm the squad members, but Jae-hyun decided to learn it later. After that, Jae-hyun decided to get to know the residents downstairs. Used absolute eyes again to scan what was going on in the house. It was important to see who was doing what exactly while no one was watching them. One of the guys who caught Jae-hyun's eye took a bottle and went to the water tank. He started to fill the bottle with water. Jae-hyun just watched and thought it was good that the guy had taken drinking water in advance. Others were about to watch a movie and looked very relaxed. Jae-hyun now understood why they had no need to enter Ha Dong-gun's squad. These people had stocked up on food and water and were feeling quite comfortable. Then Jae-hyun's gaze fell on the girl who was lying down, and this caused concern in the guy. Jae-hyun immediately jumped up and ran down the corridor. The girl had an extraordinary ability that was very necessary. She had healing. Jae-hyun was taken aback by this discovery and incredibly happy. Jae-hyun went to apartment number 2002 to meet its residents. Nobody opened the door for him, and the guy already made up his mind to enter himself and carefully opened the doors. It was very quiet in the apartment, which made the young man a little wary. Jae-hyun was nervous and couldn't bring himself to go inside for fear of disturbing the residents. He stood at the entrance for a while, then remembered that he had a special skill that would allow him to explain the situation and get inside. He used the invisible hand of the Absolute Recluse Level 1. This skill was used to summon an invisible hand and control it. With this skill, he managed to break the lock and open the doors. The broken lock was not part of his plans, and the young man was a little upset about it. Moreover, the lock was broken so that Jae-hyun still had no way to enter the apartment. He had to change his hand to wire cutters. The guy very carefully pushed the nippers inside and clamped the lock. With one easy movement, the lock was broken, and now the passage to the apartment was open. Jae-hyun quietly opened the doors and walked inside the apartment. He realized that there was no one in the apartment except the girl and ran. He immediately rushed to the girl who was lying on the floor and began to try to bring her to her senses. The girl was lying unconscious, and it was worth finding out the reason why this happened. Jae-hyun began to gently shake the girl, trying to wake her up, and spoke to her. The girl did not come to her senses. Jae-hyun was very worried. The situation was worse than he thought. Her outward symptoms suggested dehydration. Jae-hyun looks around, looking for something that might help. It was difficult for him to control himself, especially when things did not go according to plan. On the nightstand near the girl, Jae-hyun noticed a bottle of water, and from this understanding of the situation completely disappeared, since it was most likely not dehydration. Jae-hyun needed to save the girl anyway. He had to quickly think of what to do while there was still time. He started rummaging through the settings. Jae-hyun suggested that giving the girl a task would help change the situation at least a little. He wrote down the task to take a breath, and as a reward set the extraction from dehydration. It worked, and the girl began to come to her senses. Jae-hyun tried to talk to the girl until she opened her eyes. Having come to her senses, the girl immediately asked who Jae-hyun was. The guy explained that he was her upstairs neighbor and gave his name. The girl was very surprised. She didn't understand how the guy ended up in her apartment, and Jae-hyun explained that he thought she was in critical condition, so he broke the lock and entered. The girl's gaze froze. She was excited about something. Tears streamed from her eyes and the girl groaned, trying to contain her emotions. The girl covered her eyes with her hands and clenched her teeth, trying to calm down. Jae-hyun didn't know how to calm her down, because he didn't even know the reason why she was crying. He couldn't think of anything else to do to start carrying out his plan, and he called the girl by her name. He apologized, noting that the girl should help him and his friends. He explained that his friend was very badly hurt. The girl sat up and stopped crying. She did not quite understand how the guy could have found out about her, and the whole situation turned out to be very strange for her. The girl very carefully began to rise to her feet, but she didn't answer Jae-hyun's request, and Lesha silently looked at him with suspicion. She didn't understand what he was talking about or what needed to be done. She believed that she did not have the strength to help anyone. She needed help herself. What seemed even stranger to the girl was that Jae-hyun knew that she was a nurse and could treat people. She thought that judging by the fact that the guy was asking for her help, it seemed that he did not pose a danger, but first she decided to find out more about him. The girl agreed to help and asked where she should go. Jae-hyun asked her to wait a bit and opened the system screen. He gave her a new task, which was to heal Anju with her superpowers. Jae-hyun suggested that the girl eat and rest first, and said that she would bring here someone who needed treatment. The girl was even more surprised and wary. The girl was very scared of something, and she started to fuss and asked Jae-hyun to stop. She began to back away from him when she saw tangerines falling from the holographic screen into the air. She pointed her finger at the screen and asked what all this was, sincerely not understanding what was happening. Jae-hyun realized that she had been out for too long. I promised to explain everything in more detail later. He headed towards the exit of the apartment smiling, and once again asked the girl to have a good rest. Yes, John began to pick up the tangerines, checking whether they were real, and was even more surprised when she realized that they were not artificial. The girl was so shocked that she asked herself if I was dreaming everything around me. Jae-hyun hurried away from the girl and thought about everything that happened on the way home. When he entered the apartment, the system issued a notification that Dajon's trust had increased. Jae-hyun sat down on the sofa and still couldn't believe everything that was happening. He was very worried about what happened on the street with Donggon's group. According to calculations, the group should have returned by now, but they were not even visible from the window on the street. But suddenly Jae-hyun noticed some movement in the yard. Taking a closer look, he realized that it was precisely Donggon's group with a red tiger running next to it. It was hard to understand that they were running away from him, but I was still running together. After observing the squad for a while, Jae-hyun realized that the tiger was not their friend. The beast tried to catch up with the people. It growled loudly and bared its teeth. The tiger tried to speed up to catch up with the group, and it didn't look like the animal wanted to make friends. The animal was about to grab one of the guys. He was too fast. Jae-hyun couldn't believe his eyes and was very worried about his friends. He clearly remembered that one red tiger had been defeated. This meant that there were two of these beasts, and it was unlikely that the first one could have been resurrected. Donggon and his men ran as fast as they could, trying to get at least a little distance from the huge evil beast. At the most inopportune moment, one of the girls twisted her ankle. The girl couldn't stay on her feet and fell to the ground. Donggun and Hye-rin stopped. Well, running to help her was very dangerous, and if they returned, everyone would get hurt. The girl tried to get up, but the pain was too strong to stand on her foot and run further. Hye-rin screamed as loud as she could. I was overwhelmed with emotions, mostly fear. The tiger was very close, and there was just a little bit left for him to grab the girl. She understood the danger, but it was not clear from her whether she was going to somehow resist the beast or had already resigned herself to her imminent death. There were only a few seconds left. The girl's hair was already fluttering from the beast's heavy breathing. The terrible moment came. The tiger loudly clicked its teeth where the girl stood. But the beast did not have time because the girl disappeared. The tiger was a little confused and began to turn his head from side to side in search of his prey. But the girl was already completely safe. She was breathing very heavily. It was hard to come to your senses after you had already come to terms with your death. In front of her stood Jae-hyun, thanks to whom she was not in the jaws of a tiger but very high above the ground in complete safety. Jae-hyun understood perfectly well what the girl had been through in the last minute. He thought that she was on the edge. Thanks to the fact that she was declared a vassal, he was able to quickly teleport her home. Thanks to this teleportation, he was able to buy time for the others who were still below. The system again issued a notification about the possibility of people receiving citizenship. And at that moment, Ben-ho appeared in the room with his grandmother in his arms. He carefully placed the old lady on the floor and asked Jae-hyun to take care of her. Jae-hyun looked at him and asked him to wait, but Ben-ho didn't understand why Jae-hyun was saying that. Jae-hyun didn't answer and just looked out the window and thought about something for a moment. Afterwards, he looked into Ben-ho's eyes again, who begged her to help him again. But Ben-ho still agreed with Jae-hyun. Most likely it was only because he didn't respect his opinion at night. Jae-hyun decided that the young man should not return. I will not try to help those who remain below remotely. Jae-hyun used the invisible hand skill again. He thought that he had to stop you from catching that red tiger. He had a plan, and he had to act very quickly before the beast tore apart the entire squad. Dong-gon was barely holding on, but he still continued to watch over all his comrades and worry about them. He had a great responsibility for the lives of many people, and he decided that it was worth distracting the beast once more to allow the others to escape. He took out a baseball and prepared to throw, first turning to face the beast and blocking the way. He had to gather all the strength he had left and put it into this throw. Dong-gon began to run forward towards the beast and prepared to attack. The beast did not stop, and the smell of the blood of its prey became even faster. The tiger, thinking that the prey was running towards his mouth, relaxed and jumped forward. Hye-rin, seeing what her comrade was doing, loudly shouted his name, trying to stop his actions. But Dong-gon didn't stop. He was right next to the tiger, and nothing in his body even flinched. But once he got that close, the guy realized that it was too late to carry out his plan. He shouted to the others to feel sorry for you and not to turn around. They needed to get to a safe place as quickly as possible. Dong-gon himself turned sharply and ran to the side to distract the beast on himself. He sped up as much as he could muster the remaining strength. It worked. The tiger was distracted and ran after him, leaving the group. Dong-gon took a huge risk. It was more like a sacrifice for others. He had little chance of breaking away. Dong-gon could smell the beast's breath and the smell from its mouth. The monster was too close and was about to grab him. The boy could see the tiger's mouth in detail. Its huge, sharp fangs sparkled in the moonlight. Dong-gon understood that he could die at any second, but he continued to run with all his might, trying to call time for his friends. You, the beast, already felt the taste of your prey. This added strength to you. Well, very suddenly the animal was grabbed by huge, translucent pincers that reached from the sky. The beast growled loudly and jumped forward to escape the grip. His claws dug into the asphalt and made a very unpleasant sound. While this jump didn't help the tiger, the pincers held him tightly by the neck. Let's move. Dong-gon was shocked by what he saw, but now he had a chance to catch his breath a little. The beast began to rise into the air on its pincers, and Hye-rin appeared from behind it. The girl was very excited and shouted Dong-gon's name. A screen opened in front of the girl, and she had to study what was shown on it. This information shocked her, but she tried not to be distracted because it was important to be completely concentrated in the moment. She and the guys led the tiger, which Jae-hyun, using his skill, dragged into the underground parking lot. I understand that he didn't have to act on his own. He thought that if Kim Ga-yeon went hunting right now, the size of the catch would increase fourfold. Now all he had to do was wait for the girl to release her arrow and kill the tiger, and he did everything that was required of him. The tiger did not give up and was still trying to break free from the grip, but he was not successful. He only became more angry. Ga-yeon took aim and focused on her arrow. At such an opportune moment, the girl released the bowstring, and the arrow flew forward. A moment later, Jae-hyun received a notice of the red tiger's kill and the reward for it, which made him very happy. In addition, Dong-gon's loyalty increased, and he was able to register him as a vassal. After helping out in the group, Jae-hyun brought on Ju to Dajung for healing, who also began to heal the girl. Although the girl resisted, Stop couldn't help in any way, but nevertheless she knew perfectly well how to use her power, and with the help of energy from her hands she worked with the wounds. Her power was working. The large torn wound on Anju's stomach began to heal before our eyes. Dajong did the same with the other wounds. Anju's complexion immediately changed to a healthier color, and she stayed to wait for the girl to come to her senses. Jae-hyun watched this process and was happy about how lucky he was to meet Kim Dajung. By that time, Dong-gun and his men had already gone upstairs and were also present at the healing. Jae-hyun asked him how it was that they had the chance to meet the red tiger. Dong-gun shared his thoughts that apparently the house where Ben-ho's grandmother lived was on their territory. He said that they managed to kill one, but there were many more. Jae-hyun found all this rather strange, but he remained silent. Jae-hyun noted that there was not a single goblin near the house, and even if the creatures were hiding from the tigers, then Ben-ho's grandmother was also in danger. Jae-hyun also noted that, fortunately, they entered the territory of only 2 tigers. They would not have been lucky enough to return home these nights. Jae-hyun considered it a real stroke of luck that no one was seriously hurt and everyone returned back, and the goal of the sortie was achieved. The system gave a notification that Da-jung had completed the task. Jae-hyun knew about all the news much earlier than he was informed. The girl was very pleased with her work. Jae-hyun approached her and I noted that the work was excellent. The girl smiled and asked if Lena could go home now. Hyun-jun interfered with their dialogue and asked them to wait. He had agreed in advance that it was not the best time to talk, and then asked if everyone was planning to continue holding meetings at his house. We are very embarrassed to ask Hyun-jun about this, but everyone was constantly in his apartment, and it couldn't help but be tense. Jae-hyun looked at him silently. But besides him, all the members of the squad were standing in front of Jae-hyun and smiling. Jae-hyun asked the man not to worry, noting that he was going to say it anyway. Jae-hyun said that apartment 2901 was empty and promised to provide everything necessary, including electricity, so everyone can now live there. Next, Jae-hyun turned to Kim Da-bin. He said that there were 2 empty apartments on the 21st floor that would also have electricity, and asked to tell other survivors that they could take showers and relieve themselves there. The girl snuggled up to her younger brother and, looking down, thanked Jae-hyun for this. Jae-hyun looked at them again and said that if they wanted, they could take one of them for themselves, but the rest should be left available for everyone. In return, he asked for one request. The girl replied that she would agree to anything. Jae-hyun expressed his hope that the girl and her brother will continue to act as messengers between him and other survivors. Da-bin wasn't entirely happy with the word messengers, as it sounded very strange, but that didn't mean the girl was against it. Jae-hyun asked to tell the survivors that whoever kills 100 goblins first will get their own home, and he promises unlimited electricity, water, gas, and even food as a reward. Jae-hyun also added that if they have 10 survivors from each generation, then everyone will receive equal treatment. However, there was a nuance. Jae-hyun asked to warn everyone about something. The floor they were on would depend on how long it would take. Jae-hyun tried to please everyone and regretted that the residents had to fulfill certain conditions. Jae-hyun promised that he would pay fairly, but only to those who could prove their worth in their community. The guy was breathing heavily. He had been running for a long time and his breathing had become labored. He was running from a huge crowd of goblins and was almost out of strength. The goblins kept up with him and were about to grab him. The guy was sweating. Tears were streaming from his eyes. Every sip was a struggle. He couldn't shout anything except curses. He ran to the doors. There was still a little bit left, just a little bit more. Well, this distance was incredibly long. The goblins were already touching his clothes. The decisive few centimeters that separated him from death were decisive. Running up to the doors, the guy jumped forward and slid the rest of the distance, eventually flying into the doors. He shouted that the time had come. He accomplished his task. He was met by several people. They noted that this time he brought a lot of creatures with him. Having let the guy pass behind their backs, the guys immediately began stabbing the goblins with spears. The goblins were indeed too numerous to be easily defeated. We didn't manage to kill many, but that was still a good result. The goblins were on the heap. These creatures jumped over their own, as if who would get to the man first. The boys kept chipping away at their numbers, but it was really tough to deal with that onslaught. Very soon the goblins stopped attacking so actively and more of the creature retreated back. One of the people, noticing that the monsters were running away, shouted to the others to attack and not let the enemies escape. One of the guys smiled widely. He grabbed his spear more tightly and turned to the others and asked if they wanted to see something interesting. He loved to brag and never missed a single opportunity to do so and show what he was capable of. He grabbed the spear tighter and threw it forward. The spear flew between his comrades and headed towards the goblins. The goal was achieved. The spear stuck right into the chest of one of the monsters. The creature groaned loudly and soon fell to the floor. The young man was very happy and asked his comrades if they had seen this wonderful throw. When everything calmed down, the guy went up to the others and asked how many goblins they had managed to kill. They were competing with each other. One managed to kill 22 goblins and the other declared himself the winner by killing 2 more. The guy smiled and noted that the 3 of them had killed more than 100 creatures. His comrades were very surprised by such a number. Everyone was waiting for when this number would sound. They tried to find entertainment somewhere and have fun. They joked among themselves, cursed at the monsters, and rejoiced in victory. The guy who brought this crowd was a little indignant. Let's note that there were fewer goblins. This did not please the one who was looking for ways to show himself. He asked what he didn't like again, and he repeated about the number of creatures, the count of which was made incorrectly. Hyun replied that it made no difference if the results were still good, and reminded them that they would soon have a new home. The comrade did not like these words, because he almost died. Hyun covered his face with his hand and called his comrade a baby, showing his displeasure. He asked me to remind him who exactly came up with this method of hunting, and I note that it was definitely not his idea. He reminded me that he had made a plan. The spear was made by the twins, and his comrade said that he could quickly escape and would take on this role. Hyun had no intention of stopping and noted that if his comrade was not happy with something, he could leave the team and they could cope just fine without him. Realizing that he suspected a serious conflict, one of the guys intervened in this dialogue and asked to stop, after which he noted that Min's son had shown himself well. Another also confirmed that he played the bait well and ran really fast. Yep, Hyun was quite hot-tempered, and it was hard for him to pull himself together and calm down. "I'll go to the guys," asked Seung-min to apologize, because everyone was good, and there was no point in attacking anyone. Yep, Hyun slightly pulled his emotions into his hands, suggested that everyone go up to the 21st floor, and went forward first. The guys really wanted to get a new house. Well, when they went upstairs, Dabin upset them, apologizing and saying that they already had a team that received a prize. They didn't expect such a statement from the guy. They were sure that the apartment would go to them. EP Hyun was the most indignant of all, as he did not believe that there was a team that killed 100 goblins faster than them. But the girl confirmed that it was true, which made Hyun even more upset. I hoped until the very end that the girl was joking and began to attack her, that it was time to finish and his team needed a new home, which they honestly deserved. The girl tensed up and timidly answered that she was not joking at all. Footsteps were heard in the corridor, and perhaps the arrival of another team saved the girl from the conflict. Just then, the team that was the first to kill 100 goblins arrived, and the girl solemnly introduced its members. Yep, Hyun was very angry, and the team that managed to beat him acted like a red rag. The winning team stuck together and smiled at Hyun and his boys. Dabin asked one of the members of the winning team if they liked the new house, but the guy replied that they refused it. Well, in exchange for their apartment, the gentleman would install electricity and water and free his daughters from completing tasks. Dabin was very surprised and asked if Jiho's daughters were adults, because she thought that all children were exempt from completing tasks. Jiho smiled and corrected that his daughters were both adults. His wife echoed the smile and explained that they simply had childish faces and that they took after their mother. The women said that she was sure that her daughters could shoot a bow no worse than she did, but she was too worried about them. Hearing this, the guy remembered that he had promised to give them bows and arrows, but he had completely forgotten about the promise. Dabin was even more surprised and asked why they were doing this, and if they were going to continue hunting monsters, they wanted it and didn't need it anymore. The guy explained that the gentleman himself asked them to kill all the creatures in this area. He continued to complain that there were too many goblins, but Yop Hyun interrupted him and asked him to wait with his speech. He began to get indignant and asked if anyone was special and complained that there was no justice around. The guy replied that it might seem unfair, but Jae Hyun asked to send them to the 30th floor and give them the same prizes as the teams in second and third place. Da Bin, who had not heard about this, was even more surprised. Well, smiling, she asked Yep Hyun if he heard what was said, happy that they would be lucky enough to go up to the 30th floor with their team. They were expected there, but Yop Hyun was not at all pleased. His goal was his personal home, not visiting the master's floor. Taking the elevator upstairs, the team reasoned that Jae Hyun was probably younger than them and had a hard time remembering his name. EP Hyun laughed at his comrades and was indignant that everyone always talked about Jae Hyun as if he were some kind of lord. This made him incredibly funny and angry. The boys supported him, noting that Jae Hyun wasn't a god, but everyone idolized him. One of them joked that Jae Hyun was probably a cult leader. Sun Min was disapproving of such speech and noted that his comrades should not have spoken like that about a man with his abilities on his territory. It was stupid because they themselves went to see him, but at the same time they discussed and ridiculed him in every possible way. The guys didn't like this remark, and the three of them turned to Seung Min. EP Hyun basically didn't like any comments directed at him, and he turned to his comrade Yi and called him a puppy and looked at him very menacingly. Well, at that moment the elevator doors opened and let the boys out on the 30th floor. EP Hyun just asked what Seung Min was staring at. hinting that he shouldn't be looked at with a displeased face. Jae-hyun was already walking down the corridor to greet his guests. He walked slowly and with a very serious look. Well, as soon as I approached the guys, I smiled broadly and said hello. The boys stared at him. They immediately felt awkward, ashamed, and generally uneasy. The team leader extended his hand and introduced himself as Baek Seung-yob. Jae-hyun extended his hand in return and sealed their acquaintance with a handshake. He then went on to say that he was interested in watching how the team showed themselves, especially the use of barricades. Seung-epa was very shocked by this, because he was absolutely sure that Jae-hyun was never even close to hunting with his team. Jae-hyun ignored the questioning looks from the team members and said that he would immediately connect the electricity, water, and gas to apartments 1301 and 1502. Seung-yeop now looked at Jae-hyun as if he were a god. He asked if he was really capable of such a thing, and Jae-hyun confirmed his words. The guys were interested in how he could do this and didn't hesitate to ask about it. Jae-hyun ignored the question and emphasized that the guys passed the selection because they killed hundreds of goblins, and added that he was not the leader of the cult, deciding to tease them. Video surprised I saw the guys' disconcerted faces. Jae-hyun added that he also doesn't want to become a god, to finish them off completely. It was obvious that the boys felt ashamed. They didn't understand how Jae-hyun knew about their conversations, and now they didn't know where to look. Jae-hyun constantly said a lot in silence that he had one request for the guys and smiled. Jae-hyun's request was for another goblin cleanup. Sun-epa's team got into a pretty good fight, and now the whole team was running away from the creatures together. It was possible to show extraordinary dexterity and concentration, because there were a lot of monsters. These creatures literally ran on the guys' heels, not giving them a chance to catch their breath. Ep's son ran ahead of everyone and gave the command to the guy in front to throw. It was Dong-gon. He smiled and signaled that he heard and would now start shooting. He waited a little longer and then swung and launched the first spear. Throw was his special skill. He consumed mental energy to throw an object, increasing the throw fivefold, and also used the skill lunge, which consumed mental energy and temporarily created a sword aura when he lunged. Next up was Deok-su, the knight. His physical stats were boosted by loyalty, and vassals received 3 times more experience and money from monsters they killed. With such skills, they were irreplaceable in any fight. The outcome of any fight always depended on them. Their abilities were effective even against huge goblins that were larger than normal and several times. When one of these goblins ran up close to Dong-gon, he didn't run away or even move to the side. He was fully focused and waiting for his comrade's attack, trusting him completely. In an instant, the arrow pierced the head of this overgrown monster. The monster screamed and began to fall to the ground. This was Ga-yeon's doing. Her archery skills had improved even more, and she was doing incredible things with her bow. Then it was Dong-gon's turn to attack. He reached for the spear that was hanging on his back. There remained for him the same large goblin whose death was unusually easy for the young man to achieve. Without thinking for long and without choosing a special moment, Dong-gon threw a spear at the monster. This mission awarded over 3 million won to the absolute recluse's wallet and also earned a lot of experience. The mission was overseen by Ji-ho's team. After the throw, Dong-gon quickly left the battlefield and returned to the others. Jae-hyun also watched the execution of this task, but he couldn't take the guys home, as the system began to issue a notification that an unauthorized object was trying to enter. He had to start accepting new citizens into his community. This time there were 3 people. Jae-hyun thought that there should definitely be 200 of them now and offered citizenship to the newcomers. Upon reaching 200 citizens, the tax collection skill was activated, which collected 10% of the cash held by the citizens. This skill returned part of the funds distributed among the citizens. However, this type of action could not be performed at will, and Jae-hyun now needed to control these indicators as well. Jae-hyun considered that he would have to wait another 10 months to buy the capital initially. There was not enough time. In order to save his parents, he had to send Dong-gon's team to the Nanbuman area already. To begin with, he decided to distribute the funds and decided to allocate about 30% for this, convincing himself that this was a kind of investment. As soon as he did this, his house declaration skill reached level 10 and he gained 3 skill points. He was immediately overcome by a very unpleasant feeling. The entire living building in which he lived with other residents was immersed in some kind of purple glow. Jae-hyun declared an entire residential building as his own. He contributed 1 billion won in subsidies, and the construction function was activated. A solar generator, a store, and a gym were available for construction. Looking at all the specifications, Jae-hyun was shocked because in just 1 year he could get 30 million in case of construction. He chose a solar generator, and in order to buy the initial investment, Jae-hyun had to maintain the generator for at least 5 years. Jae-hyun began to walk around the room in circles, wondering whether he should install this generator or whether it would be wrong. He understood that he had too many expenses as it was, and it would be more efficient to raise Dong-gon's level rather than build something. He thought for a second and decided to review the information again. He discovered that the construction was carried out with subsidies, and in that case, this changed a lot. This money was completely separate from what he had in his wallet, so he lost little. He decided that in this case he had no choice but to use them all and began building a generator. The construction took a day. After watching the timer for a while, Jae-hyun concluded that it still seemed like a waste and thought about installing another one. The system notified him that he could only build one generator, and he decided to take a closer look at building a store. In the end, building the store turned out to be much more cunning than he had expected. An object connected to the skill shop, where you can directly sell registered items. It was curious that it did not require a separate cashier. When payment occurs, everything materialized in real time. Jae-hyun thought that until now, preparing and sending supplies was also work and took some time. People could buy everything from the store themselves, and now it was not worth spending time and additional resources on it. Jae-hyun seriously thought that building a store like this would make the community's functioning much easier. On top of that, he could set the prices himself, which meant he could increase the distribution rate of the funds for everyone. He decided not to delay the decision and started building the store. The system asked for the desired location of the building, and Jae-hyun decided that it would be in apartment 101. The construction of the store took 48 hours. Next, Jae-hyun decided to get acquainted with the gym. As it turned out, it increased physical endurance and strength, but the effectiveness of training was increased by 200%. This meant that people would be able to level up through training. He thought about what would happen if he added the mission reward to this, and immediately gave the order to turn the second floor completely into a gym. Then he looked at his skill points. By increasing one of the indicators, it became possible to buy goods not only in bulk, but also individually. This could not but please and also changed a lot. With the new features, life in the house became much easier and better for everyone. He immediately decided to test this in practice and chose water to buy. The result pleasantly surprised him. Up to 10 types of water were available for purchase. It wasn't like they had everything, but the selection had grown considerably. Jae-hyun became curious about other items as well. Noodles of various types were also available for purchase in portions. Jae-hyun couldn't help but smile as he thought about how useful this would be. Meanwhile, Deok-soo and his comrades were once again on a mission to clear out goblins. The fight was quite intense. It was difficult to make out anything in the area where the fight took place. Only the giant goblins and Deok-soo's shining armor were visible, which were crumpled here and there. The only downside to the guy's armor was that it was windproof. During active battles, you could drown in your own sweat. Dong-gon approached Deok-soo from behind and asked his comrade what would happen if he threw the spear he had brought. Deok-soo took the weapon in his hands and, a little confused, asked why Dong-gon was asking about this. Dong-gon asked for a moment, expressing his desire to throw the spear himself and prepared to do so. Without thinking twice, he swung and, taking aim, ran forward to throw. Deok-soo, watching this, couldn't help but scream. But it was too late. Dong-gon managed to let go of the handle and throw the weapon forward. Deok-soo didn't like this action at all. Somewhere it was his specialty. Dong-gon advised to cancel the summoning and then summon the weapon again, but Deok-soo did not immediately understand what his comrade was talking about. He thought for a bit and finally understood what was meant. It was like a revelation to him. The next moment he did just that. First he canceled the summoning of his halberd, and then he summoned it again. There was no need to hurt her and return it yourself. The weapon immediately appeared in his hands. Deok-soo immediately began to thank Dong-gon for calling him a genius. He was able to think of it, although he insisted that it was not so brilliant. Ga-yeon ran up to them and pointed out that it was time for them to leave since she was almost out of arrows and would soon be unable to take part in the battle. Dong-gon looked at her with bewilderment and remained in his place. The girl could not understand what was wrong and began to look around. His gaze fell on the ground where the summoned quiver of arrows lay. Ga-yeon was carried out. That finished with the arrows appeared on its own, and besides and next to her. The arrows appeared literally out of nowhere, and the girl repeated this several times. The girl fired another arrow using omnifocus, which was activated when she used another skill for observation. After that, Jae-hyun's wallet was credited with a monetary reward, and some villagers' skills increased. Jae-hyun was right that the quest could improve stats and increase rewards. Jae-hyun was starting to think there was a chance. It was about 10 kilometers to his parents' house. It took about 3 hours to walk there. Jae-hyun headed towards the exit of the apartment and carefully opened the door and walked out into the hallway. Without thinking, the guy, went to the elevator and entered the cabin. Having covered another short distance, he went out onto the balcony. The wind immediately began to ruffle his hair, and the sun pleasantly warmed his face. This was the only way he could be outside. The sky was bright blue. It was so nice until you looked down at the ruined city. Jae-hyun looked around and told himself that he couldn't delay any longer. First, he decided to deal with Ha-dong-gun's squad and open the screen. Jae-hyun reviewed all the characteristics and emphasized to himself that the skill from Kim-gon's rank was currently useful in reconnaissance. For him, that path would be too far, but if he teamed up with Yeonju and Da-jung, it would change the situation. Unlike Kim Da-jung, who had already been registered as a vassal, Yeonju had not yet reached the required level of trust for vassal status. Then the guy reviewed the development of abilities and emphasized that those who had an awakened ability from the very beginning were more effective. Jae-hyun admitted to himself that it seemed like he had no choice but to use one method. He returned to Onju, whose reward for the quest was the resurrection of her son. Jae-hyun tried to give out a reward, but the system hung up, noting that there were still insufficient funds. Jae-hyun decided to increase the difficulty of the quest as much as he could, and indicated that the quest would involve hunting a level 40 monster. He decided that a level 40 monster would definitely be strong, but the reward for it would be huge. He chose a 24-hour limit and began to think about the penalty. After thinking for a while, he decided that the penalty would be the death of the girl herself. But as it turned out, he had too little money for this. A screen appeared nearby with a notification about the capture of an orc, the reward for which was almost 3 million won. After thinking for a while, Jae-hyun's thoughts turned to the group quest. Taking advantage of it seemed like a good idea. But first he needed to gain Onju's complete loyalty. They started knocking on his door very persistently and begging him to open the door quickly. Jae-hyun headed towards the door, no longer thinking about using his absolute eyes to check who was behind the door. Without much hesitation, he pulled the lock and opened the doors. Onju burst into the room looking worried about something. The girl must have been running very fast because her breathing became labored and it took her some time to catch her breath. Tears immediately began to flow from her eyes and she asked if what she had learned was true. Jae-hyun tilted his head forward and confirmed. He explained that there was a time limit, but it was possible. The girl fell to the floor in complete despair. She was overcome with hysterics and no longer had control over her emotions. The girl began to thank Jae-hyun, although he expected a slightly different reaction. For the girl, it was a chance to see her son. She was ready for it to be just for one day, but she would be able to see him and hug him. After this conversation, Jae-hyun went about his business, which, although it could wait, he couldn't let anyone down. For about a minute, Jae-hyun looked up, completely focused. Soon the incandescent lamp on the ceiling lit up. The electricity was connected. He was glad that everything worked and began to connect the benefits further. Jae-hyun repeated the same actions again, but now in relation to the tap. After a moment, water began to flow from the tap, although it had been without water for quite some time. After a short while, a good flow of water came from the tap. He was happy again, although to some extent he was used to doing such things. He felt like a wizard, although in his life it really was like that. He was glad that he had the power to control electricity, water, and gas. At that moment, the income from the store was counted, and 300,000 won was added to the wallet. This was a good indicator because it meant that sales for the day exceeded 1.5 million. Jae-hyun used his absolute eyes skill and began scanning the house. It was very convenient because he could see what was happening in any corner of the apartment building, including the store, without leaving his apartment. Despite the bright prospects for the development of the community, people had a very hard time. They could not afford to buy onions. They received tens of times less. Some had to save up for half a month to buy this product, but they also had to buy other food and water. Jae-hyun was upset about this. No one could have imagined that the atmosphere would change so much just because he shared the reward money. Opening a store gave a lot of advantages and made me believe, at least for a short time, that the end of the world was not coming. After the store opened on the first floor, the large sums of money that could now be made from goblin hunting began to awaken in everyone the desire to hunt. Since there were no more goblins to hunt within the living complex, it was necessary to go outside. For Jae-hyun specifically, all these nuances were a plus. The level up went smoothly and Jae-hyun gained many new citizens. The population was approaching 800 people. Jae-hyun believed that soon everything would begin to gain momentum in geometric progression. Jae-hyun kept getting new notifications about the death of new orcs or some other monsters that people were hunting for money. People had to go hunting more and more often. It didn't matter much what level a person had, since everyone had to buy the necessary things. For some, hunting was much easier if it didn't seem like making money. Ju, who turned into a bear and cute many advantages. She managed to tear small monsters to shreds with one swing of her clawed paw. No one could compare to the she-bear, and fighting her alone was also a bad idea. After finishing another skirmish with a monster, the girl began to take on her normal human form. Gradually, her body's fur disappeared and her figure changed. The girl finished her transformation and exhaled, but someone immediately called her. The other girls were worried about her and wanted to make sure she wasn't hurt anywhere. Anju replied that she was fine, and even if she was slightly hurt, it was nothing to her. The healer asked her not to overexert herself, noting that she had finished off the monster before the others had time to do anything. The girl apologized, noting that she had most likely tried to take all the kills for herself. Gaeon asked her not to apologize, emphasizing that thanks to her they felt safe. Anju did not respond to this. Jae-hyun watches the girls and notes that it was a good idea to leave Anju and Da-jung together overall. It was logical considering their characteristics. Another fight awaited the girls, although they did not plan to get involved in anything like that anytime soon. But menacing roars and screams could be heard from the subway tunnel. This meant that it was worth being on guard and focusing on the danger. But before the girls had time to come to their senses, a huge orc burst out of the tunnel, who was not like the others. Apparently it was the leader. He was 10 times bigger than a normal orc. He had shoulder pads and a good-sized sword, which made him very different from the normal warriors. The girls froze in place, not understanding what they should have done next. Against such an opponent, even the three of them might not be enough. Anju immediately began to transform back into a bear, since there was very little use for her in human form. The girl was ready to rush into the attack. She didn't want to do anything rash and let her partners down, but she still couldn't resist and began to carefully step towards the orc. Coming closer to the enemy, she began to growl, warning me that you can't joke around with her. The orc didn't even flinch, but only smiled, which was a very bad sign. He pulled his weapon from behind his shoulders and pointed it towards the bear. Then the she-bear attacked. The monster was ready and managed to cover itself with the handle of the axe. A strong confrontation between two very powerful opponents was expected. But still, climbing such a monster alone was very dangerous and it could all end tragically. Gaeon moved as far away from the battle as she could and began to aim her bow at the monster. The girl was extremely focused and ready to use all her skills. Taking aim, she released the arrow which rushed forward with incredible force. The bear barely managed to jump back, letting the arrow pass through to the monster. The creature was quite agile and was able to defend itself from the arrow with the handle of the same axe. The she-bear roared in anger and rushed to attack again. It was even scary to watch. The orc and the bear roared at each other and were eager to fight. The outcome was hard to predict, but after a short moment, splashes of blood became visible. A little while later, the bear's growl somehow changed, and it was noticeable how the enemy's blood was pouring out of her mouth. The monster no longer posed a threat. After the victory, the outpost was added to the list of available structures for construction as a reward. It was a safe zone, well organized outside the domain of the absolute recluse. However, this zone would only activate if there was a citizen with the title of knight or higher living in it. Jae-hyun was astonished. The outpost cost 1.3 billion won. He thought that since all the orcs had been destroyed and there was money, it was still worth relying on a new building. After the system asked for confirmation of the decision, Jae-hyun hesitated a little, remembering about the girls. The start of construction meant that Donggun, Da-jung, and Oju would have to stay there for a week until construction was completed. The biggest loss in his case was time. A whole week was too much. Jae-hyun couldn't waste so much time. He thought that the monsters were near Jeonpo Donggan and the townspeople, and in that case, the outpost was not really needed. After thinking a little more, Jae-hyun decided not to get involved in the construction and to refuse. Well, Jae-hyun thought to himself that this would be a good acquisition. He thought that if only he could build this in the main house, then he could relax a little. This way he could leave his family in complete safety. But he knew that if he was being realistic, it wouldn't be easy to bring his grandparents here. He simply prayed silently that all his relatives would remain alive and wait to meet him. Considering the circumstances, she decided that tomorrow they would send Donggon's squad to the main house. Soon the rest of the squad members arrived at the tunnel where the bear had gotten into a fight with the orc. The guy examined the monster's corpse and was amazed by its size and the fact that the bear managed to defeat it on her own. He thought it was just madness. It was unimaginable to him that he could tear an orc apart with his bare hands. But the guy quickly came to his senses and connected that Anju was not human, and there were already other possibilities there. He thought it was obvious since the girl was strong even before receiving Jae-hyun's blessing. But it was unclear how Jae-hyun was able to convince her because she was completely obsessed with goblins. He assumed that she could also receive some new ability, so she agreed to join them. At that moment, a new group task appeared to return back with a time limit of 1 hour. Everyone was getting ready to head home. The boy whistled for his raven before setting off. The bird appeared out of nowhere. It was obvious that it had a dark connection with its owner. The guy was already waiting for his raven, putting his hand forward for it to land. The raven obediently sat on the hand, croaking first. The boy scratched the bird and asked it to be quieter. Dong-gun approached Kim Jin-om and asked if he could scout out the situation ahead before they set out. He agreed and sent the crows asking him to be careful. The bird looked at its owner as if it understood everything. After saying goodbye, Kim Jin sent the bird on reconnaissance. The raven knew where he needed to fly and could then find his owner, even if he was not in the front seat. The raven rose high above the roofs of the houses and surveyed the entire area. But few knew that Kim Gen himself saw through the eyes of this raven. This was his special skill. Kim Gen told the others that he saw no problem, and in his opinion they could not move out right now. Dong-gun thanked his comrade and nodded to the others. Without delaying until the situation changed, the detachment set out on its journey. Kim Gen was very wary and listened to everything. He heard some strange sounds from the darkness of the tunnel and felt in his gut that something was wrong. He turned around and asked the others if it was just a rat or if he imagined it. Kim Gen knelt down on the floor and began to study the sounds. The guy never managed to hear anything specific with his skills, but he couldn't calm down. I continued to behave cautiously, looking around and listening to the slightest rustle. In the darkness, 2 small red lights appeared, similar to someone's eyes. And indeed, after a moment, a large rat jumped out of the darkness and ran about its business. He behaved quite confidently and was not afraid to run across the road when people had not yet moved to a safe distance. The rat jumped over the rails where the tracker had recently stopped to study the rustling sounds. Afterwards, the rat stopped and looked around. She raised her head and looked at the signs under the roof of the tunnel. I can get the impression that the rodent understood the inscriptions and navigated by them. Meanwhile, Jae-hyun gathered everyone he might need and gave a speech. He expressed his hope that they would be able to help him. The boys and girls looked at their leader in bewilderment, as he still couldn't collect his thoughts and find the right words. Everyone looked at each other, trying to guess what the conversation would be about. Jae-hyun finally began to speak and noted that he knew his chances were slim. Dong-gun interrupted him and asked if Jae-hyun's family was also inside the apartment complex. Jae-hyun replied that it was difficult to guarantee anything. Ben-ho was the first to volunteer to help, as he was very grateful for saving his grandmother. In addition to his own spirit, he encouraged others as well. Ben-ho spoke on behalf of his comrades and asked them to let Jae-hyun help him. Dong-gun supported his friend's words and emphasized that it was thanks to him that they were all able to survive, so they were obliged to help in return. He came closer to Jae-hyun and said that they would definitely help him. He just needed to be told what to do. This calmed and cheered Jae-hyun up. The guy smiled and thanked everyone present for their willingness to help. He then noted that all the orcs that had captured the Chonpo station had been eliminated, and the squad simply needed to follow the rails to the Soman station. Jae-hyun said that the Chogwulchi station was the closest to his house, and they had to use the second exit. After they left the station, he would give them more precise instructions. He corrected that he was not asking them to do everything at once, as that would be too selfish. To begin with, they needed to focus only on capturing Soman Station. Jae-hyun thanked everyone once again and advised them to get a good rest before starting the mission in the morning. Oju listened to the guy until the end and asked him to wait a little. She also wanted to speak out. She had one question. The girl waited until everyone turned their attention to her. She asked if Jae-hyun couldn't use his powers to bring his family to him. Jae-hyun was a little confused by this question. He replied that of course he had tried to do this before asking for help. He attempted to achieve this through a quest reward that allowed him to teleport the chosen target. In fact, the reason why he was so happy about Moon Byung-ho's awakened ability was precisely because of this. He thought that if he did everything right, he would be able to teleport the family to this high-rise building. The result was a complete failure. Hae-hyun emphasized that it was just a guess, but perhaps the location of Byung-ho's grandmother was outside his area of influence. If this was really the case, if something happened to his parents, he would not be able to do anything because they would die outside of his influence. He explained that he, unfortunately, was not omnipotent either. There were things he could do and things he could not. After these words, Jae-hyun noted that the squad shouldn't worry too much about this and smiled. He glanced at Anju and noted that the promise he made to her was something he could keep. Thanks to these words, the girl's trust increased even more. The girl smiled and thanked Jae-hyun for being honest. Jae-hyun smiled and said that he also appreciated this quality in everyone else, and suggested that they go on vacation after all. Everyone gathered together and headed towards the exit of the hall. Dong-gun, passing by, wished him a good rest and noted that he was already leaving. At that moment, a notification from the system appeared again, saying that some unauthorized creature was trying to enter the house. Well, he could be offered citizenship. Jae-hyun used the skill of absolute eyes and simultaneously offered citizenship to the guest. It was another awakened one. Jae-hyun knew this from her characteristics. This girl's skill was to become the queen of mice. When Jae-hyun saw what was trying to enter his home and get citizenship, he was shocked. It was a real rat. The rat followed Dong-gun's squad from the subway tunnel. She was very interested to know where these people were. She watched them for a long time, and thanks to her ability to transform into a mouse, no one even suspected that they were being watched. She saw that people were killing orcs and thought that they could be just as awakened, but she doubted that this was even possible. She decided to follow them first and take a closer look at what kind of people they were. She realized that it was becoming increasingly difficult to be responsible for everyone on her own. With such a possibility, it should have been possible. There were still some nuances. So to begin with, the rat decided to follow the squad and find out as much information about them as possible. She ran after them for a very long time, sniffing out everything she could. She ran along familiar streets and then followed strangers. In one of the places, the rat stopped and sat in place for some time. When she saw how busy the residential complex was, she became confused. There were children running around inside. There were a lot of people. Well, at first glance, it seemed that the end of the world had not touched this place. It was incredible that children were playing on the playground when the rest of the city was completely destroyed and there was not a soul to be seen. She was interested in why there were so many people in this building and where they came from. Having seen everything with her own eyes, she decided that she would explore to find out more, as this place made her ask a lot of questions. She decided to take a closer look and ran towards the residential complex. Despite the fact that the man was in the form of a rat and could not attract unnecessary attention to himself, the rat moved very carefully, in short dashes. Soon the animal reached the threshold of the house. When she tried to sneak inside the building, she encountered a problem. The absolute recluse system did not let her in. The rat hit its head very hard and didn't expect to hit the protective barrier here. She didn't know what to do next until a window appeared in front of her offering citizenship, and she immediately agreed without hesitation. Well, she immediately encountered another problem. The system did not recognize her mouse squeak. She had a choice to be reborn as a human or to look for other ways to get in. She understood that in the form of a rat, it was more likely that she would not be able to obtain citizenship of this place. Well, after trying again, it worked out and citizenship was obtained, and the passage into the building was open. The rat immediately ran back to the door. The rat was glad that she had managed to solve this problem without turning back into a human. When she ran inside, she was confronted with loud screams from the residents who never expected to see rats in their home. She immediately rushed to the shelter, and all the residents began to catch her because they did not know that she was not quite a simple rat. This caused a lot of trouble. Vitya was in great danger because of her appearance. She tried to get around all the people and hide in some secluded place and began to roll on the floor, performing tricks. Only after she had exhaled and found herself in a more or less safe place did she encounter new shocks. She found herself in a gym, the presence of which surprised her even more. The boys were playing sports and seemed completely unconcerned about what was happening outside their home. Everyone was focused only on doing their exercises and did not pay attention to the fact that guests had wandered in. Besides the guys, there were also girls working out in the gym. Everyone was in very good shape and worked hard at their training, which made us admire them. It was a very strange sight to see. The rat had more and more questions about what kind of place this was. After some time, the rat got back to the subway tunnel and met Dong-gun's squad. The rat turned into a girl. Her head still ached from the blow to the protective barrier. Well, the girl returned with good news and useful information for herself. She began to rejoice that she had finally found a way to survive in such a terrible world. The only problem was how to get there. She understood that I just needed to get to Jeonpo Station somehow. She assumed that she had only one option. It could be done. She could have gone along the rails through the tunnel, but it wasn't as easy as it seemed. The thing was that at Soman Station, through which she would have to pass, there was a monster, and it was very difficult to slip through it, even in the form of a rat. Well, it was precisely because of this that she had a chance. One way or another, there was no place where she couldn't get to. Jae-hyun was getting notifications that he had managed to tame a mouse, which gave him some experience. After looking through all the information, he realized that the girl was controlling the mouse, not being the mouse. He used the Absolute Eyes skill again. It was curious that the A-rank awakened had come by himself. He had set himself the goal of recruiting the rat as a vassal at any cost. But he still couldn't find the animal in his house. Looking into every corner, he realized that the rat simply wasn't there, and first he needed to summon it and issue a quest. Continuing to look for the rat, he set the task of visiting her apartment. Well, while examining the house, he realized something interesting. He remembered the conversation with Anju, who asked him a question about his family. He began to think that everything had failed just because his parents were beyond his power. It was obvious that those who received citizenship were under the influence of his power. It didn't matter how far they were. The corpses of the monsters they hunted were still defending themselves, so it was confirmed. He changed the task for the rat. He set a time limit of 10 seconds and the penalty was to call him. Although Jae-hyun didn't even expect that he would be able to use the penalty for failure. He really wanted to test his theory. And even if it only worked once, he would check if it was possible to summon a citizen from outside the home, and if successful, it would be possible to safely move the family to him. When an outpost is launched, it will temporarily gain the same power as the home territory. This meant that once Dongon's squad was dispatched and the outpost buildings began to function, it would almost be a success. He will then be able to grant citizenship to his entire family. And then he will use the quest system to summon them and thus save them. Jae-hyun was very motivated. I think his plan should work more likely. The only problem was how much it would cost. He decided to try everything right away and opened a window for issuing tasks. Jae-hyun begged for the quest to cost me more than 1 billion won. In the end, the system gave me a notification that the quest cost was 30 million. Jae-hyun exhaled, and a moment later a girl appeared in front of him and immediately began to fuss and ask where she was. Jae-hyun's insides turned over. His plan was starting to work. He was silent and looked at the girl, very confused and not knowing what to say first. The girl was shaking with fear because she had no idea what could happen to her in this place. Jae-hyun came a little closer and greeted the girl by her full name, Seo Ye-ji. This frightened the girl even more, and she asked how he knew her name and who he was. Jae-hyun explained that he was the one who gave her citizenship. The girl wanted to say, but he answered for her and confirmed that she was on the top floor of the apartment that she saw through the mouse. Jae-hyun apologized for such a sudden invitation and suggested that the girl must have been very surprised. He handed the girl a chocolate bar and a can of water and said his full name. The girl was shocked but accepted the gifts. The girl tried to wrap her head around everything that was happening. Jae-hyun only nodded affirmatively at all her guesses. The girl realized where she was and was delighted, which surprised Jae-hyun himself. Ye-ji said that she understood that she would be asking for a lot and explained that there were people for whom she was responsible and asked to accept them too. The girl continued and said that it was very difficult for her to drag everyone to this area and admitted that she was going to take a risk. Jae-hyun asked the girl how many people were with her because the allowed space was running out. The girl answered that there were only 35 people. Jae-hyun was silent for a while and thought that he couldn't imagine that there would be someone else with her. He immediately apologized and warned that it would not be easy, but the girl did not expect such an answer and looked questioningly at the guy. She asked him again what he meant, and Jae-hyun explained that he couldn't transport everyone with his power. The girl grabbed his clothes. She rebelled and screamed that her younger brother was still there, and her mother promised to do everything she could to get them taken away. Jae-hyun was in a difficult situation. He wanted to ask her for help, but first he had to help her. Jae-hyun asked for a minute, explaining that he needed to think about everything. Ye-ji had interacted directly, but he was still able to grant her citizenship, meaning the shelter had recognized the mouse as part of her. He assumed that something similar could work for other people as well. Jae-hyun reviewed the girl's characteristics and found that her trust had already grown. Although given the circumstances, trust was quite logical. He returned to the girl and called her name again. He asked if she could really do anything. Ye-ji looked at him very upset but didn't answer. After waiting a little, the girl replied that she would do anything that was required of her. Jae-hyun sighed in relief and said that there was one way to try to take away her loved ones. Jae-hyun warned that first the girl must completely trust him. Jae-hyun explained that if she promised to trust him completely, she would definitely save everyone. The girl fell silent again because it was difficult to imagine what it meant to trust completely. After thinking for a bit, the girl finally agreed and replied that they trusted him and would do anything to save their family. The system gave notifications that the girl's trust had increased even more, and then loyalty was unlocked. Jae-hyun smiled contentedly and tried to register the girl as a vassal. This worked and the girl glowed blue. This scared her. But overall, nothing bad happened, which is why she should worry. I'll finish the registration, Jae-hyun. Asked the girl if there were any tame mice near her family. The girl thought again, remembering something similar. Jae-hyun realized that the girl had tamed mice and asked her to send one of them to her family right now. The girl sat down more comfortably and, closing her eyes, concentrated on her task. Meanwhile, Jae-hyun used the skill of absolute eyes and did not leave the girl's side. His plan continued to work. He managed to see the mouse that Ye-ji was controlling from a distance. People immediately saw this mouse as soon as it approached them. One of the girls immediately guessed that this husband was most likely their friend Ye-ji. The mouse didn't run away. A screen appeared above it. Well, there was no information on it yet. It took some time for food and water to start pouring out of the screen. Everyone was amazed by such technologies because food really did appear out of nowhere. The trust of these people began to grow noticeably. Jae-hyun was glad that his plan was still working. Seo Ye-ji's ability and absolutely perfect gaze matched. Jae-hyun thought that from now on, tens of thousands of mice using the sewers could become his eyes. It seemed crazy, but Jae-hyun was absolutely thrilled to have received the ultimate spy. The girl, having finished her task and coming out of her trance, turned to Jae-hyun after apologizing for disturbing her. She asked if the guy meant the area near Songdo Beach called Nambu-Mindong, and he confirmed it. Oddly enough, Seo Ye-ji was already in Nambu-Mindong, where her family's house was located. Of course, it was much easier for her than for Dong-gun's squad, who didn't know this area at all. Besides, all she had to do was send the mouse. This fact alone made it possible to know whether her family had survived, and it made it much easier to deliver the necessary supplies. The girl smiled and asked to leave this task to her, agreeing to help Jae-hyun. The guy plucked up his courage and asked the girl to go straight away. If of course she was not against their great joy, the girl agreed. Jae-hyun asked if she could, if possible, walk through the subway tunnels. The smile on the girl's face disappeared, and she asked if he meant the first line of the Busan subway. Jae-hyun explained that they were planning to use this route for a rescue mission later, but the girl screamed loudly that it wouldn't work. Jae-hyun was a little confused by such a sudden cry and asked why, and the girl explained that a monster lived at the Somyeon station. Jae-hyun didn't know about this and looked at the girl questioningly, waiting for an explanation. But in general, explanations were not needed. Jae-hyun thought for a while about what the girl told about the monster. Finish in thought. He asked if the girl could send at least one mouse to the place where the monster was, and the girl agreed to do so. Jae-hyun repeated the previous trick with the absolute eyes and sent the mouse girl to look around. The husband ran very carefully but nevertheless quickly. Soon the girl reached the right place where that very monster lived. It was a huge snake or lizard, which apparently was not averse to feeding on orcs and goblins. The monster swallowed them whole, along with their clothes and shoes. The husband froze in place because any extra rustle could attract the creature's attention. But this did not help, and the monster still noticed the rat and hissed disgustingly. The snake began to turn its head in search of the source of the sound and smell. Very quickly, the monster found the rat, which was hiding and trembling with fear. The monster immediately opened its mouth to swallow the mouse like the orc before. The rat remained in place, I don't know where, and it was possible to run away to hide. But she still came to her senses and ran to save herself. The snake quickly ran after her, as if he had no other meal. He hissed loudly and crawled along the animal's tracks. The rat didn't stop and ran as fast as she could, trying to find a place to hide. Jae-hyun continued to observe what was happening, learning as much as he could while he had time. He noted how huge the creature was and wondered what level it was, thinking that the snake could be even higher than level 40. The girl turned to Jae-hyun, asked if he had also seen this monster, and emphasized that this was the reason why they couldn't use Summon Station. She suggested skipping one station and going to the Pomnagal station. Let's note that she saw the skills of the guy's allies, so they know how strong they are. She assured them that with their skills, getting there wouldn't be a problem, but Jae-hyun didn't answer right away. He needed to think about it a little, but he still decided that the girl was right and agreed. He stopped using the absolute eyes skill and smiled and suggested that the girl go to apartment number 2701. To the surprised look, Jae-hyun explained that the girl would be living there today, but she would have to clean up. For Ye-ji, this was no problem, and thanking him, she began to get up. Looking after the girl, Jae-hyun thought that in truth, he would most likely have come up with the same thing. If this had been before they met, sooner or later he would have come to this conclusion himself. He opened the control window and decided to start installing the solar generator. He has already spent a lot of resources to install several solar generators around the residential complex. This thing turned out to be quite effective, and he was glad that he decided to build it. But this was still not enough to provide for almost 800 people. If the goal was to raise funds and install more facilities, then more workers were needed. At the very least, it was necessary to organize work in 3 shifts. This also applied to new public spaces in general. Jae-hyun thought about these matters for a while, but quickly shook off all unnecessary thoughts at that moment and got down to more important work. He needed to prepare for an even bigger hunt than he had had before. As agreed, Dong-gun's detachment set out on its journey early in the morning. He ran next to Gae-yeon and shouted to her that the monster was approaching and was right behind them. The entire detachment took up suitable positions for attack and defense and began to wait for the enemy. A large flock of huge bats descended upon them. In the battle with these creatures, the bows, which fortunately everyone had, were of great help. Arrows flew towards the winged monsters with great speed and power. Thanks to high skills, all the arrows hit the target, and the number of monsters began to decrease very quickly. It didn't take the squad long to deal with all the bats and continue on their way. Gaeon asked everyone to make sure that their comrades were safe. Hye-rin approached her, wanting to talk about that snake that Jae-hyun mentioned at the Somyeon station. The girl doubted that they could really shoot it themselves. Gaeon said that everything should be fine, and Jae-hyun would be able to call them if something went wrong. These words were enough to calm her down, and the girl breathed a sigh of relief. Dong-gun intervened in their conversation and also emphasized that there was no need to worry. He led his squad, stepping into the tunnel first. Soon they reached Summon Station. Even from afar, the guys were greeted by a very unpleasant smell that intensified as they approached the station. But when they got to the place, they were met with a not very pleasant environment. There were corpses of goblins and orcs scattered everywhere, which actually stank throughout the entire tunnel. What you see is that the smell was so disgusting that it was hard to hold back the urge to vomit. Dong-gun saw that Gae-yeon was very sick from the sight, asked her to hold on and just move on. Everyone kept close to each other and moved forward in small steps. Dong-gun stayed ahead of the group, with a flashlight attached to his forehead, and was the first to see what was ahead. He abruptly gave the command to stop, and everyone froze in their places. His face was distorted in complete horror, but he couldn't look away. A huge snake appeared in front of him, which Yeji and Jae-hyun were telling about. The sight of this monster made everyone tremble. Compared to the orcs and goblins, this was a real monster. Dak-soo, unable to contain her emotions, asked in a trembling voice how they were supposed to fight such a huge monster. The monster was so strong that its movements alone made it difficult to stay on its feet. Dong-gun hugged Gae-yeon and held her tightly. He gave the command to everyone to duck. The boys and girls immediately listened to his command and fell to the ground. The walls of the tunnel shook and dust rose around, so heavy and powerful was the monster.